Hello and welcome. Wherever you are tonight, whether you're resting in bed with the weight of the day slowly leaving your shoulders, or maybe listening while walking under streetlights, or folding laundry, I'm glad you're here. This is a quiet place, a gentle space to settle in and drift back in time. And tonight, we're going somewhere most people never think about. Not into the great halls of medieval castles, but into the soil beneath the feet of those who lived outside their walls. But before we begin, if you enjoy these calm, detailed journeys into the past, go ahead and tap the like button. It helps more people find this space. Subscribe if you'd like to return again. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it for you? It's always a quiet kind of wonder to see how far these stories reach. All right, let's begin. Slowly. Tonight, we're returning to the Middle Ages, but not the parts you've seen in films. This isn't about swords or knights. It's about what people ate, or more precisely, what they grew, quietly, year after year, tucked behind cottages, along hedgerows, and in garden beds scraped into hard ground. We're going to talk about the vegetables, many of them now long forgotten, that medieval farmers and families relied on to survive. You might be surprised how much we've lost. Picture yourself in the English countryside, sometime around the year 1283. It's a soft spring morning. There's still a chill in the air, but the frost is gone. The ground is damp, full of promise. In a small garden behind a timber-framed house, a man kneels in the soil. His name is Osric. His hands are thick with mud. His knees sore from years of planting and weeding. Around him, the first shoots of skirret are beginning to push through the dirt. Skirret, not something you'll find at your local grocery store. It's a pale, slender root, shaped like a thin carrot, but branching out into delicate fingers. When cooked, it's sweet, almost nutty. In Osric's world, it's a reliable crop. Not glamorous, but dependable, the kind of thing you boil, mash, or fry with whatever else is on hand, usually onions or herbs from the edge of the yard. A few steps away, his wife, Elswith, is checking the patch of good King Henry. That's a plant, not a person. Though in some villages, people did talk about their vegetables like they were family. Good King Henry is a perennial green, something like spinach, though coarser, tougher, and not quite as polite on the tongue. Still, it grows back every year without being asked. And in these times, that sort of loyalty is valuable. Elswith picks a handful of leaves. They'll go into a soup later, maybe with some barley and a bit of salted pork if they're lucky. If not, it's greens and a slice of black bread, same as yesterday. The meals are simple, repetitive, but every leaf matters. Further down the garden rows is salsify. Now the root, long and pale with tiny hairs that never seem to come off, no matter how much you scrub. It's sometimes called the oyster plant, not because it tastes like seafood, but because someone, somewhere, decided it sort of reminded them of one. Truthfully, it tastes like a cross between parsnip and hope. People roast it, boil it, even bake it into pies if they've got enough flour to spare. And then there's Alexander's. Tall, leafy, sharp-scented. A cousin to celery, but more assertive. It's used in broths and stews and chewed raw by people who believe it's good for the blood. Some swear it helps with digestion. Others just eat it because it grows easily and they're hungry. Out near the fence, half wild and growing wherever it pleases, is mallow. Its roots are soft and sticky, used in old remedies to soothe sore throats and quiet coughs. Mixed with honey and herbs, it becomes a kind of natural medicine. Not always pleasant, but usually effective. These gardens weren't just about food. They were about survival. Seasons could be cruel. A single storm could wash out months of work. And so the vegetables grown were chosen carefully, not for taste or beauty, but for toughness, resilience, and the ability to feed a family with very little. And then Just behind the chicken coop, something a little different is growing. A girl named Heloisa, maybe 14 or 15, sharp-eyed and full of her own thoughts, has started a little garden of her own. Nothing fancy, a few rows marked out with sticks and string. Her mother says she should be helping with the turnips, but she wanted to try something different, something with a bit more character. She traded a wooden spoon for seeds from a traveling merchant, rocket, lovage, and wormwood. Strange herbs, sharp in scent and even sharper in taste. Rocket, especially, is strong. Peppery, bold. It makes your eyes water if you eat too much. But she likes it. And she's not the only one. A boy named Folky, who lives 3 cottages down, stops by one day. She offers him a bit of flatbread with cheese and a handful of rocket leaves on top. He eats it with a kind of cautious enthusiasm reserved for trying something new in front of someone you're trying to impress. He says it's different. Then he says it's good. A week later, he brings her a basket of eggs from his family's coop. Sometimes a garden grows more than vegetables. The truth is, these foods, skrit, good King Henry Alexander's, mallow, salsify, were once part of everyday life. Now they're almost entirely forgotten. But for hundreds of years, they filled bowls and bellies, flavored stews, healed colds, and helped love bloom in quiet corners. And maybe they still deserve a place in our stories. So, as you rest here tonight, imagine the smell of damp earth and fresh herbs, the feel of soft leaves under your fingers, the sound of a spade pressing into spring soil. This was the heartbeat of daily life for so many, so long ago, and we've only just begun. We're still with Osric and Elswith in their little garden at the edge of the village. Morning has turned to early afternoon now, the kind of quiet, hazy hour where not much happens, but everything is still being done. You can hear the creak of wood from a cart rolling by, the occasional bleat from a sheep somewhere down the lane, and the gentle rhythm of hands pulling weeds, shaking off soil, and setting down baskets. Osric wipes his forehead with the back of his wrist and leans on his spade. The ground has finally softened after a long winter, and his back already feels it. But the patch looks good. The roots are strong this year. He's thinking it might be a good season for parsnips. Now, parsnips aren't forgotten, not completely. But the ones Osric grows are wilder than what you'd find today. Rougher, more bitter, unless they've seen a few good frosts. He remembers an old saying, "A parsnip picked before the frost is like a man kissed before shaving. Best avoided." That one still makes Elswith laugh, though not always out loud. She's over by the plot of leeks now. Not the supermarket kind. These ones are long, pale, and deeply fragrant, with that comforting scent of something slow-cooked and hearty. They grow through winter, standing tall even when snow clings to their leaves. Leeks are something special. Not just food, but a symbol of pride in some parts of the world. Especially Wales. People pin them to their tunics on feast days. It's strange how something so humble can carry such weight. Down along the edge of the field is a little patch of chickweed. It's not even supposed to be growing there. It just shows up on its own, year after year, as if it knows it's needed. It's soft, green, slightly peppery. A handful thrown into a pot of broth can stretch a meal just enough to feed one more person. It's a quiet kind of generosity, the kind that medieval life often depended on. Children come running past, barefoot, wild-haired, laughing over something that probably involved falling in mud, and one of them stops to point at a patch of nettles near the hedgerow. "Don't touch that," Osric calls out, not unkindly. Stings worse than a bee on a bad day. But later that night, Elswith will be out there with gloves, carefully picking the young tops. Nettles sting, yes, but boiled into a soup, they lose their bite and become something nourishing. High in iron, surprisingly rich, with a taste somewhere between spinach and wood smoke. It's one of those plants that reminds you nature doesn't give without a little warning, but it does give. Over by the path, old Wulfric, neighbor, part-time beekeeper, full-time storyteller, leans on his stick and watches the garden with a look like he's remembering every meal he's ever eaten. You've got fat hen growing by the back wall, he said. Osric nods. Wasn't trying to. Wulfric just shrugs. She's stubborn, that one, but she'll fill your belly. Fat hen, also known as lamb's quarters, is a scrappy little green that grows just about anywhere. Some call it a weed, others a miracle. In hard years, it's the difference between going hungry and not. People would dry it, store it, grind the seeds into a kind of flour. It's not fancy, but it's honest. You can see now that a medieval garden wasn't just a food source. It was a quiet, persistent kind of life insurance. Every plant had a reason. Nothing grew for beauty. Everything had to earn its keep. Some were even meant for more than eating. There by the door to the cottage, Elswith has planted Angelica. It towers above the others, with its tall stalks and round flowering heads. She says it keeps away illness, that it wards off the foul air, especially when boiled into tea or chewed raw. Osric doesn't argue. If she believes it, that's enough. And besides, he quite likes the way it smells. Sharp, green, almost sweet. And not far from it, hidden between a broken fence post and an old wash basin, is something even stranger. Horseradish. Its leaves are wide and wild, but the root is where the power lies. When grated, it releases a sharp heat that climbs right up your nose and into your brain. They say it clears the senses. Some even say it drives out bad spirits. Mostly, though, it just makes you cry and then laugh about it. Heloisa comes around the back of the house, her apron full of herbs she's picked from her little patch. She's still tending her rocket and lovage with care. She's got a few stalks of tansy too, bitter and medicinal, once used to flavor cakes during Easter, though you'd have to balance it with a lot of honey to make it go down easy. She's trying to grow purslane now. It's low, creeping, and easily mistaken for a weed, but she's read, or heard, more likely that, it's full of goodness. In her mind, her little garden is more than food. It's an act of curiosity, of rebellion, something of her own, in a world where most things are handed down and rarely questioned. Back in the kitchen, a pot simmers. Elswith adds a bit of everything. Leeks nettles, a pinch of dried skirret from last season. She crumbles and a little cheese, saved from market. It's not a feast, but it's a meal. The smell is warm, familiar. It smells like survival, like home. And so, when we think of medieval food, we often imagine feasts in great halls, roasted meats, golden goblets, long tables, piled with bread. But the truth, the quiet truth, is that most meals happen just like this, in gardens, in cottages, in small bowls and deep pots, seasoned with what the earth would give and what the weather hadn't taken away. So tonight, as you listen, maybe lying back now, eyes growing heavier, remember these quiet crops, the skirret and nettles, the mallow and rocket, the food that fed people not just through history but through hard times, through winters, through lean years and long days. We're not done yet. There's still more to discover, more to remember. The light is starting to shift now. That golden, slanted kind of afternoon light that comes just before evening, when everything takes on a softness. The garden glows, not brightly, but like it's holding something in, like it knows something the rest of the world's forgotten. Inside the cottage, Elswith is slicing dried parsley root. It looks like a small white carrot, but the smell is earthy, deeper. Not the leafy herb we know today, but its stouter cousin, the root used for broth, for stews, sometimes even grated raw, if there's vinegar to tame it. The taste is sharper than you'd expect, somewhere between celery and nutmeg, used sparingly. It gives body to a dish. Used too much, it takes over. Elswith knows the balance. On the low wooden table near the hearth, a small basket holds a mix of roots and leaves, picked earlier in the day. Turnips, rough, round, pale-fleshed, sit beside beet leaves, wilted slightly in the warmth. Turnips were a staple long before potatoes arrived in Europe, roasted, stewed, mashed into thick pastes to eat with stale bread softened in broth. There's also cow parsnip, a plant you'd need to handle with care. Some parts are edible when cooked, others not. In the wrong hands, it could cause burns. But Elswith's mother taught her the safe parts when she was a girl, and she's passed that knowledge down to Heloisa too. This is how most knowledge moves here, not in books, but in stories and gestures, in the careful watching of someone who's done it for years. Out back, Osric is checking the compost heap. Nothing is wasted here. Not truly. Peelings, husks, stalks, all go back into the earth. Even weeds have their uses. Sorrel, for example, grows wild at the edges of the path. Its leaves are bright, lemony, almost tangy on the tongue. In small amounts, it lifts a dish, adds something sharp and surprising. Too much and it overwhelms, but just enough, and it's like adding sunlight to a pot of broth. Further afield, just past the lane where geese wander like they own the place, there's a wild plot where a few braver plants grow. Burdock root is one of them. Long, spindly, stubborn. You have to dig deep to get it out. And you'll probably curse while doing it, but cleaned and cooked, it has a rich, slightly sweet flavor, almost like artichoke. It's a root that demands patience and repays it quietly. There's also hogweed, young shoots only, and only for those who know exactly how to handle it. One wrong step, one wrong leaf, and it's not food anymore. It's danger, but handled properly, boiled with care. It's another way to stretch the meals, another piece of the puzzle. This is the reality of a medieval kitchen. It's part cooking, part caution, part memory. By now, the fire in the hearth has burned down to a steady, orange glow. The pot over it simmers with a quiet rhythm. Inside, water thickens with root starches. Herbs drift to the surface and disappear again. Every so often, Elswith stirs it with a long-handled spoon that belonged to her grandmother. It's worn smooth from decades of work. Heloisa, meanwhile, is drying herbs on a wooden board near the door. Yarrow for fevers, chervil for flavor, fennel for its seeds, which can ease a stomach after a heavy meal or a poorly cooked one. These aren't just seasonings. They're part of the household's survival strategy. Every bit helps. Every leaf matters. And as the sun begins to dip lower on the horizon, the villagers begin to settle. You can hear it in the sound of the day winding down, the clatter of buckets, the bleating of sheep being gathered into pens, the soft murmur of prayers spoken beside beds made of straw. Osric places his tools by the shed, not because he's done for the day, he never really is, but because the light says it's time to stop. His hands are cracked, nails dark with soil, but there's something proud in the way he looks at his garden. It might not be much, but it's theirs. It keeps them full. It keeps them going. Elswith ladles stew into wooden bowls. Not much meat tonight, just a little rind of smoked bacon for flavor, but the roots have softened into a thick, hearty meal. The greens have turned tender, the broth rich and warm. It's the kind of food that doesn't need much talking over, just a quiet hum of gratitude passed from one spoonful to the next. Outside, a few birds still sing, not quite ready to give up the day. A breeze carries the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. The world is still in that rare way. It only is just before night truly arrives. And you, listening now, maybe you're starting to feel that stillness too. Maybe your eyes are heavier, your breath slower. That's all right. That's what this is for. Let this garden stay with you tonight. Not just the plants, but the people. The ones who grew what they could, with what they had, who remembered which plants to pick, which ones to leave, and how to turn almost nothing into something that fed a family. These were not grand people, but their lives were full of quiet knowledge, rooted deep in the earth. Evening has settled now. The last streaks of daylight have faded from the sky, leaving behind a deep, soft blue. A few candle flames flicker inside the cottage windows, casting long, swaying shadows on the wooden walls. It's the kind of darkness you can feel in your chest, a stillness that hushes everything. Dinner has been eaten, bowls scraped clean, spoons set aside. The stew wasn't fancy, but it filled the belly and warmed the bones. Osric sits on a low stool by the fire, gently sharpening his knife with a smooth stone, not out of urgency, just routine. The same way he did last night, the same way he'll do tomorrow. Elswith, with her thick fingers and steady hands, is packing dried greens into cloth sacks. Some nettle, some mallow, some wilted fat hen leaves gathered before the frost hit. She packs each sack tightly, ties it with string made from old linen, and places it in a wooden chest under the window. In a few months, when fresh food is gone, they'll dip into these supplies a little at a time. This was one of the great challenges of medieval life, keeping food once it was grown. There were no freezers, no refrigerators, and most cellars were little more than cool, dry corners under the floorboards. Vegetables had to be dried, smoked, pickled, stored in vinegar or salt, or kept cool with whatever nature allowed. Take skirret again. After harvest, the roots could be kept in damp sand for weeks if the air stayed cool. But if it got too warm or too dry, they'd wither, collapse in on themselves like empty socks. And then they were lost. Every root had to be watched, rotated, sometimes even sung to, quietly, under breath, as if it would make a difference. And maybe it did. Maybe the attention was part of the magic. Parsnips, turnips, and beets were hardier. They could survive a long winter if stored in a dry pit lined with straw. People dug these pits at the edge of their gardens, covered them with stones, and hoped no animal would dig in before they could dig back out. In some villages, these pits were shared between families. A quiet kind of trust was needed. If someone took more than their share, well, you'd know. People always knew. And then there were the greens that couldn't be stored. These had to be preserved. Chard, sorrel, and good King Henry were often hung in bunches above the fire, slowly drying in the smoke until they curled like paper. Once brittle, they were crumbled into jars or sacks and used through winter, usually in broths or porridge. A spoonful here, a pinch there, just enough to bring back the memory of green things. Not far from the cottage, near the edge of the woods, there's another kind of garden, less cultivated, more intuitive. It's where Elswith gathers plants she doesn't speak about as much. The ones used for illness, childbirth, wounds, the serious things. There's lovage, with its tall stalks and strong celery flavor. It's used for digestion, but also sometimes as a charm, woven into garlands or hung over beds to ward off bad dreams. There's meadowsweet, with its sweet scent and white blossoms. Once used to ease pain, its leaves tucked into bedding to soothe sore joints. And there's wild radish, not a tidy little vegetable like the kind you see today, but something stringy, tangled, sharp in taste and spirit. Its pods can be pickled, its leaves cooked, Some years it refuses to grow. Other years it takes over everything, as if reminding the world that it's not quite tame. Here Louisa has been watching these plants too. She's taken to sketching them in the dirt with a stick, drawing leaves, stems, roots, so she remembers their shapes. She says she wants to know what's useful and what's just pretending. She says the plants talk, if you listen long enough. Elswith doesn't argue. Meanwhile, in the village beyond their little plot, others are tending their own quiet crops. An old widow named Brenna grows sea beet along the stream bank. Its leaves are glossy, dark green, and tougher than the garden variety. It doesn't mind the salty air, and she swears it tastes better the closer you are to the sea. At the edge of the churchyard, Brother Aldwin has a narrow strip of land where he grows wood sorrel, fennel, and ramsons, wild garlic with broad leaves and a strong peppery bite. He uses them not just for the monastery kitchen, but in poultices and teas. His hands are stained green, more often than not. He says the plants are closer to God than people are. No one laughs. They just nod. And on the farthest edge of the village, there's a family who grows herb bennet, a shaggy little plant with small yellow flowers and roots that smell faintly of cloves. They use it to flavor ale in the winter when hops run low. It gives the drink a warm, spicy taste, something to look forward to when the days are short and the wind bites. All of these plants, all of these stories, quietly working together to keep life going. No spot of earth was wasted. No leaf was taken for granted. Even weeds had their moment. And as night deepens, and a few stars push through the clouds above, the family settles into their evening rhythms. The fire is banked, tools cleaned and stored, children half asleep, the world narrowing to a few soft sounds. The creak of wood, the rustle of straw, the sigh of someone settling into sleep. You too might be feeling it now, that gentle heaviness, that quiet peace. So just rest here for a moment longer. Let the names of these plants drift through your thoughts. Skirret, mallow, fat hen, angelica, sorrel. Words almost forgotten, but never truly lost. Carried through time by people like Osric and Elswith. And now, carried by you. The village sleeps now, the kind of sleep that only comes after honest work. The fires are low. The sky is full and dark, with only a sliver of moon lighting the paths. Somewhere, a dog gives one soft bark and then settles again. The night has tucked everything in, but in the dark, things are still happening. Beneath the soil, roots continue to grow. Seeds quietly split open. Leaves collect dew in the moonlight. In the medieval world, nature never really stops. It rests, like we do, but it does not pause, and neither do the plants. Let's talk about wild mustard, a plant often pulled up as a weed, but kept by those who knew better. It's sharp, peppery, almost too bold to eat raw, but ground into paste or boiled into a mild sauce. It adds something hot and bracing to otherwise bland meals. In a world where salt was precious and spices were luxury imports, mustard was the spice of the commoner, a sharp taste of fire on the tongue. There's also garlic mustard, which sounds like a joke someone made up to confuse people. But its real leaves that smell of garlic, with none of the bulb picked young. They're tender, almost sweet. Let them grow too long, and they become bitter, defiant, much like people. Weld grows nearby, though it's not for eating. Its yellow flowers and leaves were used to dye cloth, a bright, strong yellow. It clings to the edge of disturbed soil, places where carts have rutted the path, or where old walls have crumbled. It's a plant of resilience, of coming back, even when things fall apart. And then there's wild celery. Not the crunchy green stalks we think of now, but a rangy, intense herb that smells like summer and salt. It grows best near rivers and damp places, and people used it to season fish, to flavor broth, or as a tonic to clean the blood, whatever that meant to them. It may not have worked in the modern medical sense, but it worked in the other sense. It gave people the feeling of trying, of doing something. So many of these plants lived in the edges, the margins. They grew along walls, near pigsties, at the forest edge. They weren't always planted. They weren't always welcome. But they came anyway, and the wise ones, the observant ones, learned to use them. Elswith remembers her grandmother showing her how to spot celandine in early spring. Its yellow flowers come even before the grass fully returns. The juice from its stem was dabbed onto warts. Children called it devil's milk for the way it stung. But it worked, and so it stayed, year after year, even when its use was half forgotten. In the morning, she'll gather a few shoots of sorrel, and wood betony, if she can find them. Betony was said to guard against nightmares. People would stuff it into pillows, hang it above doorways, and even sew it into clothing. Not because they fully believed, but because someone once did, and the memory was enough to keep doing it. By now, the cottage is completely still. A soft snore rises from the children's side of the room. The fire is mostly ash, though a few embers still glow like eyes in the dark. You can hear the wind outside, slow and heavy, brushing against the thatched roof. Osric stirs in his sleep. Maybe he's dreaming of something. He wouldn't say, even if you asked. He's not a man of many words. But you can tell he takes pride in the land, in knowing which root pulls easiest, which leaf means rain is coming. He's the sort of person who touches a plant and knows whether it's ready. That knowledge doesn't come from books. It comes from time. Heloisa lies awake, eyes open, staring at the wooden beams overhead. She's listening to the wind, thinking about her little herb patch, wondering if the tansy will bloom early this year, wondering if she should try planting borage, a star-shaped blue flower said to bring courage. Some say Roman soldiers used to drink it before battle. She's not planning a war, but maybe it'll help her find her voice. Maybe it'll just be pretty. Either reason is enough. Out in the fields, even the scarecrows seem at peace. Their arms outstretched, faces stuffed with rags, watching over soil that sleeps. In the hedgerows, the first buds of hawthorn are forming. In time they'll bloom white and thick. The berries, when they come, will be tart, mealy, good for jellies and medicine, but not yet. Everything in its time, and maybe that's the deeper rhythm of these forgotten plants. They each had a season, a window of use. And once it passed, that was it. Until next year, you had to pay attention. You had to know what to pick and when. Miss it, and you waited, or went without. In today's world, so much is available all the time, out of season, out of place. But back then, food came with memory, with patience, with a relationship between people and plants that was built on trust and a bit of luck. So tonight, as you listen, as the world quiets around you, maybe let that idea settle in. That even the smallest things, tiny roots, bitter leaves, herbs growing through cracks, once held whole families together, once carried them from one season to the next. And now, centuries later, those stories are still growing. In gardens, in hedgerows, and in you. Morning will come again soon, but not yet. For now the night holds. The sky is still dark, and the air is cool and still. In the distance, an owl calls once low and steady, and then falls silent. It's a sound that's barely changed in 1,000 years. Inside the cottage, the quiet is complete. The only light comes from the moon slipping in through a crack in the shutters, tracing a line across the dirt floor. Dust motes drift through it like tiny stars. And in a small wooden bowl near the hearth set, there before sleep, rests a handful of withered root ends and dried herbs. Tomorrow, Elswith will start again. She'll soak what needs soaking, she'll slice what needs slicing, and with those few quiet ingredients, she'll make something that carries her family through the day. Not because it's special, but because it's theirs. That's what so many of these forgotten vegetables were. Not exotic, not luxurious, just dependable, familiar. You didn't brag about a stew of fat hen and turnip greens, but you were grateful for it. These were the plants that stood by you when nothing else did. Even now, centuries later, a few of them still wait quietly in fields and forests, growing wild in places people no longer look. Some return every spring like they never left. Mellow, nettles, chickweed, sorrel, others are barely hanging on, surviving in seed banks or private gardens kept by curious hands. And some are likely gone for good, forgotten by name, lost in the folds of time. But even those left something behind, a flavor, a story, a smell that lingers faintly in the air after the pot's been emptied. If you listen closely, you might still hear it, a whisper of how life used to be, slower, simpler, but harder, not easier, never easier, but more connected to the land, to the seasons, to the humble magic of a garden that gave what it could. And maybe that's what you take with you tonight, not just the names of roots and herbs, but the sense of rhythm, of patience, of the kind of wisdom that doesn't shout but waits, the kind that lives in worn hands, in cracked wooden spoons, in footsteps worn into soil. So, wherever you are now, whether you're lying still in bed, eyes closed, or just listening as the night carries on, know this: you're not far from that old garden, the one behind the cottage. With the leeks and the skirret, the rocket and the nettles, it's still there, in some way, and you're welcome in it. Anytime you need the quiet. Rest well, traveler. The sky is beginning to shift again, just a little. That deep, endless dark is softening at the edges, giving way to a quiet gray. Dawn is still a ways off, but the world can feel it coming. A faint glow behind the hills, a change in the way the air tastes. Inside the cottage, Osric is stirring earlier than usual. Some days start before the sun does. He swings his legs over the side of the straw-stuffed mattress and rubs his face with both hands, shaking off sleep like a dog shakes off water. He moves quietly, careful not to wake Elswith or the children. The floor is cold. The fire has gone out entirely. Nothing left but a thin layer of ash. He'll start it again soon. But first, he steps outside. The earth is damp, the kind of cold that clings to your boots and soaks into your bones if you stand still too long. But Osric's already moving, heading to the shed to check on the stored roots. Parsnips, beets, turnips, and a few precious Scorzauner roots. Scorzauner. You may have never heard the name, but in Osric's world, it's a quiet treasure, sometimes called black salsify. It's a dark-skinned root with a pale, creamy inside. When peeled and cooked gently, it has a taste that's something like artichoke crossed with chestnut. Subtle, nourishing, dependable. The kind of food that feels more comforting than exciting, like slipping into a warm coat. He peels a few carefully, watching his breath in the cold air. They'll go into breakfast, a thin porridge, stretched with some leftover greens and whatever herbs Elswith dried last month. Not far from the roots lies a bundle of field beans, broad, squat, and a bit rough around the edges. These were one of the staples of medieval peasant diets, cooked down into pastes, thickened into stews, sometimes even ground into flour. They weren't glamorous, but they were full of strength. Osric remembers stories of winters survived on beans alone. Not happily, but survived nonetheless. And cowpeas. They don't get as much attention, but they're hardy and they grow where others won't. Their vines sprawl and twist, climbing whatever they can find. The beans are small, earthy in flavor, and they keep well through winter. Elswith stores them in clay jars, covered with linen and sealed with wax. Back near the garden fence, something smaller catches Osric's eye. Corn salad, sometimes called lamb's lettuce. It grows low to the ground, almost shy. Its leaves are soft, nutty, and one of the first greens to show after the frost. Some villagers ignore it, others, like Elswith, treat it like a gift. A signal that spring is coming, even if winter hasn't quite finished speaking. There's something humbling about these small, quiet plants. They don't demand space. They don't scream with color or boast of sweetness, but they grow and they give, and they remind people that life, no matter how hard, finds a way to keep going. Later in the morning, after the fire is lit and the house begins to warm, Elswith begins preparing a small vinegar infusion, wormwood, fennel seeds, and a handful of caraway. It's meant for stomach troubles, but Osric jokes that it could wake the dead. She doesn't laugh, but she smiles the way someone does when they've heard the same joke 100 times and still don't mind. Caraway is a favorite of hers. She bakes it into bread when there's time. Its seeds are strong, a little sweet, a little sharp. Some say it keeps away evil spirits. Elswith mostly likes the way it smells when she crushes it with a stone. In the corner of the kitchen, hanging above the hearth, is a small dried bundle of wild marjoram, a soft herb with tiny purple flowers and a smell that reminds you of warm afternoons and something sweet you can't quite name. She adds it to meat when they have it and to beans when they don't. It lifts the taste just enough to remind them of summer. Outside, the village is waking up. Slow steps on muddy ground, a rooster that sounds older than it is. The first voices of the day, low and mumbled. No one speaks much in the morning, not until hands are warmed and bread is broken. Heloisa joins her mother by the fire. She's holding something behind her back, a small handful of pennyroyal. She found it near the stream, growing between rocks. It's not meant for eating, but it has its uses. In the wrong hands, it's dangerous. In the right hands, it keeps fleas away. Elswith nods, takes it gently, and hangs it to dry near the others. And there, in that simple gesture, something passes between them. Not just herbs, not just knowledge, but trust, continuity. The unspoken bond between those who keep things alive, not just people, but the wisdom of plants, the rhythm of the land, the quiet sense of what grows where and why. It's a small thing, but it matters. And so the morning rolls on, slowly, purposefully. Fires lit, water fetched, breads sliced, gardens checked. The kind of morning that doesn't need to be remembered to have mattered. The kind that simply is, and in that, carries everything forward. You, listening here now, are part of that rhythm too, quietly, gently, taking in the names, the textures, the lives of these long-forgotten foods. Some still grow wild, some wait in seed catalogs. Few people open. Some might even grow again, if someone maybe you decided to plant them. But even if you don't, just remembering them is something, letting their names live again in the stillness of night. The sun is rising now, not with a burst of gold and trumpets, but with a slow, steady light that crawls across the land like warm breath. The roofs of the village glisten with dew. The fields stretch out under a pale sky, and the sound of birds begins to stir in the hedges. The day has begun. whether anyone feels ready or not. Osric carries a basket to the garden. It's a simple thing, woven from willow, patched with cord, but it's been with him for years. Inside it, he places a handful of tools: a short blade, a wooden trowel, a small cloth sack. Today, he's gathering cresses: land cress, watercress, wintercress, whatever has managed to push up through the cold soil. Cresses were among the earliest greens people would harvest. Their flavor is bold, a bit spicy, like they're in a hurry to be noticed. And maybe they are, because they don't last long. Osric clips a few careful leaves and tucks them into the cloth sack. They'll go into a morning mash with barley and root scraps. Not much, but enough to wake up the taste buds. In another bed, tucked near the fence line where the sun lingers longer, a patch of skirret is starting to send up its thin green shoots. This plant always surprises him. It's not loud. It doesn't grow fast. But when you need it most, in the dead of winter, it's there beneath the soil, waiting. You just have to remember where you planted it. Elswith is in the kitchen again, her hands moving without thought. She's crushing dried sweet cicely, a soft, fern-like herb with a sweet aniseed scent. It's rare to find, but once you know it, you don't forget. She uses it to sweeten dishes when honey is low. A handful in a pot of porridge can change everything. Not just the taste, but the mood. That's what these plants did. They didn't just feed people. They lifted them, gave them brightness in gray months, gave them something to talk about. Did you taste the sesame in that stew? The cress was sharper this year. These were the conversations that filled long evenings, that stitched one day to the next. Heloisa steps outside with a bowl of scraps, peels, stems, trimmings from last night's meal. She takes them to the compost pit behind the house, scattering them gently, but something catches her eye. Just near the edge, growing wild and stubborn as ever, plantain. Not the banana kind. This is the green, broad-leafed plant that thrives in trampled places, footpaths, thresholds, the worn spots of the world. It's a healing plant. This kind of plantain. Crush the leaves and press them to a sting, or scrape, drink it in tea to soothe the stomach. Its presence here feels like a reminder. Even in the places where life wears thin, something still grows. Later that day, Osric makes his way into the woods with a small sack slung over his shoulder. He's looking for ramsons, the wild garlic that carpets the forest floor in early spring. Its white flowers haven't come yet, but the leaves are there, broad, flat, and unmistakable. He picks them carefully, mindful of the patch, never taking too much. There's a respect that comes with foraging, a quiet agreement between people and place. The leaves will go into a stew tonight, or maybe just chopped fresh and stirred into cheese. The sharp bite of it will linger on the tongue long after the meal is done. On the walk back, he passes the marshy edge of the common field, where a few marsh samphire plants have started to show. Salt-tolerant, crisp, almost briny in flavor, a strange little treat. Some call it sea asparagus. Here it's just known as that good green near the bog. Every plant has a name like that. A local name, a family name, often not the one in books. Sometimes not even written down, just spoken from one mouth to another over the years. That's how knowledge lived, in voices, in habits, in quiet, repeated acts. Back at home, Elswith is laying out dried lovage to pound into powder. She'll add it to bread dough, or to meat if there's any to be had. Lovage tastes strong, somewhere between celery and pepper, and adds depth to dishes that are otherwise simple. It's one of her favorites. A kitchen herb, yes, but also an old medicine, a warming herb, they say, for aching joints, for tired hearts. She stirs a bit into the pot on the hearth. The air begins to fill with its sharp, earthy scent. Not overpowering, just present. A signal to everyone in the house that something is coming, that food is on its way. And as the village carries on, fields being tilled, tools mended, bread rising in ovens, the small, invisible work of these vegetables continues. They grow unnoticed. Wait until someone remembers them. Bend in the breeze. Feed people in quiet ways. You might be lying there now, soft beneath your blanket, hearing these names: Skirret, Ramsons, Sicily, Lovage, and feeling them drift through your thoughts like old friends you didn't realize you'd forgotten. That's all right. That's how it starts. Some stories come back gently. The day has taken hold now. It's not loud. Medieval days rarely were. No engines, no ticking clocks, no constant hum of machines. But there is sound. Rhythmic, alive. A soft chorus of tools working against wood and soil. Chickens muttering. Water pouring from buckets into troughs. The crack of kindling catching fire. The sun climbs higher over the rooftops, warming the stone, waking the insects, softening the chill from the thatch-covered homes. It's the kind of warmth you don't notice right away, but when it touches your shoulders, it stays. Osric is back at the garden, kneeling near the row of turnips and beetroot. These are familiar vegetables, ones that still live in our kitchens today, but even these were different back then. Smaller, denser, earthier. The beets especially were often used more for their leaves than their roots. Beet greens were a staple in lean seasons, tossed into pots, boiled with grains, or simply salted and eaten plain. He pulls a few, brushing the dirt away with his sleeve. The tops will go in the soup, the roots stored carefully. If left too long, they go soft. If pulled too early, they stay bitter. There's a right time for everything. Osric knows that. Not because someone told him, but because he's watched year after year. That's what experience looks like here. Not degrees or certificates. Just time, quiet time. Not far from him, in a shaded patch of earth where the sun rarely touches, something else grows. Ground elder. Most people now consider it a weed, a nuisance. But back then, it was valued. The young shoots taste a bit like parsley with a hint of celery. It's tender, especially when new. Elswith harvests it in spring, before it turns fibrous. It's one of those plants that disappears from menus, not because it failed, but because it became too common to be noticed. And then there's mallow, again, this time flowering. Its soft purple petals stretch wide in the light, almost decorative, almost. But Elswith knows better. The leaves soothe wounds when made into poultices. The flowers can be brewed into a gentle tea, useful for coughs or restless children. She keeps a small jar of dried mallow tucked away, her own version of medicine. The more you listen to these plants, the more you begin to see how tightly they were woven into every part of life. Not just meals, but rituals. Not just nutrition, but comfort. Heloisa, her apron slightly stained from kneeling in the dirt, comes in carrying a bunch of bittercress, small, bright, peppery. She lays them on the table like they're something precious. Maybe they are. In a long winter, even one mouthful of green can feel like a feast. And nearby, drying by the window, are tansy leaves. Their smell is strong, almost medicinal. In the spring, Elswith uses them to flavor little cakes made with oats and honey, especially around Easter. Tansy was long thought to cleanse the body, a kind of seasonal reset. Too much is dangerous, but just a little is tradition. These foods carried belief as much as flavor. People didn't eat only for hunger. They ate to stay well, to mark the seasons, to honor the dead, to bring in the new year. A bowl of porridge could be a ritual, a mug of ale, steeped with herbs, could be a kind of prayer. At the edge of the property, Osric has planted wild leeks, known in some places as ramps. They grow slow, close to the ground, with a smell that cuts through the cold. When cooked with root vegetables and a bit of fat, they create a stew so fragrant it can fill the whole house. That's what's planned for tonight. Something rich, something earned. In the meantime, the midday meal is simpler. Elswith takes yesterday's bread, hard now, almost like stone, and soaks it in broth, with chopped Alexanders and a pinch of sorrel. She heats it gently, breaking the bread apart with her spoon as it softens. It's a humble dish, one you wouldn't serve to guests. But today, it's perfect. The children eat in silence, scraping bowls, not out of formality, but out of focus. Hunger has a way of making you present. Afterward, Osric takes a quiet moment to sit under the tree by the corner of the garden. The branches are just starting to show new buds. Above him, the sky is clear and wide. There's no sound but the wind brushing through leaves and the low creak of branches adjusting. He thinks about the season ahead, what to plant next, whether the skirret will need thinning, whether the turnips might bolt early this year. These aren't grand thoughts, but they matter. They're the kind of thoughts that keep people alive. And perhaps you're thinking now too, not about crops, maybe, but about care, about attention, about the slow work of keeping something, anything, alive. Maybe you feel it in your chest, that sense of rhythm, of tending, of passing something small but meaningful from one pair of hands to the next. And if you're still listening now, with the world quiet around you, this is a kind of tending too. The sun has reached its peak, but the heat is modest. This isn't the blistering midday of southern kingdoms. It's a temperate warmth, softened by breeze and cloud. The kind of day where work continues steadily, without rush or complaint. Elswith is kneeling at the edge of the herb bed, fingers brushing the soil gently, checking for the first signs of goutweed. It's an unassuming plant, lacy-leaved and pale green. Most today would rip it out without a thought. But back then, it was a prized spring vegetable. It was one of the first greens to arrive after the long, root-heavy months of winter. The leaves are tender when young, slightly nutty, with a faint bitterness. In stew they soften, in a skillet they almost shine. She picks only the best handful, small leaves, no stems, and leaves the rest. A good gatherer never takes too much, always leaves some behind, for tomorrow, for the insects, for balance. Near the hearth, a small clay pot is warming gently, filled with chopped beet greens, onion tops, and a spoonful of vinegar. The smell is rich and green, like spring in a bowl. Elswith stirs it slowly, careful not to scorch the bottom. She adds a pinch of dried marjoram, stored from the summer before, its scent still potent despite the passing months. Outside, Heloisa is tending to a patch of purslane. It's a crawling little plant, shiny leaves, red stems, easily overlooked, easily stepped on, but it's packed with richness. It doesn't taste like much, not at first, but in soup, it thickens. In bread, it adds moisture. In famine years, it saved more lives than anyone recorded. She doesn't mind that it's simple. Some of the best things. She gathers it into a small bundle, tying the stems with thread she keeps in her apron pocket. One of her quiet dreams is to build a record of these plants. Not a book necessarily, but something so that when she has children, they won't have to guess which leaf to pick. She thinks about that as she walks back to the cottage. About memory, about how much of what they know lives only in hands and habits, not words. The shape of a root, the scent of a crushed leaf, the way nettles sting if picked too late, or how cress wilts if left in sunlight too long. Even now, you can feel it. how these vegetables are not just food, but inheritance. Not the kind you wear on your fingers or hide in a box, but the kind that lives in quiet routines. In recipes passed with a glance, not a scroll, in the way someone stands when they dig, or hums while they cook. Back inside, Osric is grinding wild carrot seed with a mortar and pestle. It's not for eating. It's too sharp, too oily, but Elswith uses it in sachets she tucks into their clothes to ward off lice. It's not perfect, but it helps. And the scent, a mix of earth and spice, is oddly comforting, like pine needles and old paper. And speaking of scent, a small bunch of calamet is drying above the stove. Light mint, almost citrusy. Ulrich brews it in tea when he feels tight in the chest. He doesn't talk about those days, but Elswith notices. She adds honey without asking. That, too, is a kind of knowledge, a kind of growing. The hours pass like this, slowly, purposefully, without waste. A boy from the neighboring croft arrives with a gift, a handful of bladder campion, its pale flowers still intact. He says his mother uses the young shoots in soup, and that it tastes better than you'd expect. He leaves before anyone can press a coin into his hand. It's not about trade, it's about sharing. A little kindness, rooted in soil, and in that moment, the connection between people and plants is clear again. These weren't just survival tools. These were part of the social fabric. When someone had too much of one thing, they shared. When someone was sick, they brought the right leaves. When someone's crop failed, a neighbor's garden helped fill the gap. Even in a time that was hard, even in years of hunger or frost or plague, there was always this, the quiet resilience of people who knew the land and listened to it. And maybe now, as you lie still or sit quietly with this story in your ears, you can feel some of that settling in your bones. A kind of ancestral calm, a reminder that our bodies remember these foods, even if our tongues do not. They were there in the early days of agriculture. They were there in every village, every cottage garden, and though some are gone, their roots still reach us. Let them reach you tonight. Let the names linger. By mid-afternoon, the warmth of the sun has mellowed. Not yet the golden hour, but leaning in that direction. Shadows grow longer across the thatched rooftops, and the garden paths glow faintly under the softening sky. Osric walks slowly now, not because he's tired, though he is, but because he likes to take stock of the garden while the light is like this. Everything looks different in late afternoon. The colors deepen, the shapes soften. You notice things you missed before. There, under the elder tree, a patch of chickweed has crept up overnight. Delicate, light green, full of tiny white flowers like stars fallen into the grass. It's edible, of course. Mild, cooling, good in soups or raw. But more than that, its sudden appearance means something. The soil is warming. The next planting season is close. Nature has its own calendar, and Osric reads it better than the one kept at the chapel. And beside it, the edges of a once-forgotten wild radish patch are blooming. Purple-veined flowers, wiry stems. Elswith lets it grow on purpose now. The seed pods, when young, are crisp and peppery, almost like little vegetables of their own. She pickles them sometimes, tucking them into jars with vinegar and mustard seed. They keep well and taste like summer even in February. The garden, you see, wasn't just a space for growing food. It was a way of telling time. The arrival of nettles meant it was time to clean out the storehouse. The blooming of mallow meant cough season was near. Ramson signaled the return of warm soil, and sorrel warned that the last frost had passed. They marked time not in months, but in leaves, and each plant came with its own whisper of meaning. Lovage for strength, marjoram for happiness, tansy for clarity. Whether these beliefs were true hardly mattered. They were part of the landscape of thought, woven into prayers, into gossip, into lullabies sung while stirring porridge. Elswith remembers one such song, barely now, from her mother's voice, something about sowing caraway to keep love from straying. She doesn't believe in such things, not truly, but still she keeps a small patch by the back door, just in case. It's more habit than faith, a way of honoring the ones who came before. Heloisa is out again, sketching, not in paper and ink, those are luxuries, but with a sharpened stick, drawing leaves into the dirt. She copies the serrated edge of a sorrel leaf, then beside it the rounded shape of mallow, then the long, sharp outline of wild fennel. No one asked her to do this, but something in her wants to remember. She stops for a moment, wipes her hands on her apron, and looks out at the field. You can see the thoughts in her eyes. She's wondering what other plants are out there, past the trees. What's growing in the ruins near the old Roman road? What's hiding in the shaded places no one tends? Maybe one day, she'll go find out. Back in the kitchen, Elswith is preparing a simple remedy. Meadowsweet, dried and crumbled, steeped into hot water. It smells faintly of almonds and fresh hay. She adds a spoon of honey and lets it sit, for sore joints, for old aches. Osric will drink it without comment. That's how their care works. Quiet, unspoken, these uses culinary, medicinal, symbolic, overlapped constantly. A root could be food and healing and ritual all at once. Burdock was used in teas for skin problems, but also roasted in stews when meat was scarce. Angelica was chewed to fight off plague breath, but also candied for sweets in wealthier kitchens. Even the humble dock leaf had its place, soothing nettle stings, thickening soups, acting as an impromptu bandage when none could be spared. Every part of the garden mattered, not just the harvest, but the stems, the flowers, the seeds. Seeds, especially, were treated with great care. After the growing season, Osric would dry them slowly, wrapped in cloth, labeled with scraps of charcoal-drawn marks, his own silent system. He didn't keep them just for himself. Seeds were shared, traded, passed along at market, or between neighbors. A handful of skirt root crowns for a pouch of wild carrot seed, a promise to return next season with the same, if not more. Seed saving was community work, a quiet collaboration across winters. And those seeds told stories too. Heloisa holds one now in her palm, round, rough, warm, from the sun. A parsley seed, she thinks. Or maybe chervil. It's hard to tell sometimes, when they've been dried and kept for months, but she likes not knowing. It means every planting has a bit of mystery in it. You might be thinking now about how far we've come from this kind of life. About how rarely we think of where food comes from, of how we eat tomatoes in winter, berries in spring, and never once ask if the land is ready. But these stories, these vegetables, remind us that food once moved in time with the body and the sky. It came with patience, with care, with gratitude, and maybe that rhythm still lives in us, somewhere beneath the noise. Maybe that's why hearing about Mallow and Lovage and good King Henry brings a kind of calm, a kind of remembering. Not just of history, but of something quieter, slower, within ourselves. So let yourself rest here a little longer, in the late afternoon hush of this garden. Let the scent of warm soil and drying herbs settle around you. The light has shifted again. That rich golden haze has returned, stretching long shadows across the garden paths, catching in the leaves, softening the rough edges of stone and wood. It's the hour when everything feels slower, more thoughtful. The world inhales and holds it for just a moment longer. Elswith stands just outside the door, wiping her hands on her apron. The bread is cooling on the windowsill, still warm, with a crust darkened by the heat of the hearth. Not perfect, maybe slightly misshapen, a little cracked on one side, but it's heavy, satisfying, full of caraway and crushed grains, flavored with a little vinegar and a pinch of dried ground elder. Osric leans against the fence post, one arm resting on the top rail, watching the last rays of sun settle on the cabbage rows. He's quiet now, not from weariness, but from a kind of contentment, the sort that comes when things have been done. Not all of them, maybe, but enough. He thinks about the seasons, not as numbers or months, but in patterns of growth. The coming of bittercress in early spring, the burst of wild garlic after the first thaw, the appearance of mallow and nettle when the ground softens. Now, the edges of the plants are starting to curl. The sun sits lower. You can feel it in the soil when you press your hand down. Less warmth, more dampness. The season is beginning to turn, and with it, thoughts begin to shift from growing to storing. In the storage nook inside the house, Elswith has started to make room. She lines the shelves with dried leaves, dock, shard, sorrel, each carefully labeled with a scratch mark or bit of colored string. She checks the seal on the vinegar jugs, taps the lids on the honey pots, and shakes each sack of beans to be sure there's no damp. Nothing is wasted. Not if they can help it. She pulls a small cloth bundle from a shelf, a mix of parsley root, wild celery seed, and a hint of sweet Sicily. It's for Osric's knees. A tonic, or maybe just comfort. She'll brew it into tea later when the light has gone, when the fire crackles low and the world feels smaller. Heloisa is counting dried seeds now, laying them out in rows on the wooden table. She's sorting by color, shape, and feel. She doesn't know all their names yet, but she knows what they become. She likes the mystery of it. She'll trade some at the market next week, with the other women offering beet seeds for wild fennel, or skirret root crowns for dried purslane. It's not just trade, it's conversation, community. She remembers last year, when a boy from a neighboring village gave her a few herb Robert seeds, tiny things, no bigger than a fleck of dust. He said his grandmother used the plant to soothe fevers. She planted it and watched it grow beside the path, its pink flowers opening like a shy smile. She still keeps a handful of those seeds in a pouch tied around her wrist. Each seed is a kind of memory, a marker of what was and what could be again. And so the work shifts, from sowing to saving, from gathering to preserving, from the forward motion of spring to the inward folding of autumn. Elswith starts preparing the first pickles of the season. Wild radish pods, steeped in brine with dill and a single clove of feral garlic. The mixture bubbles faintly in its clay pot. She sets it near the window where it will catch a bit of sun during the day. The smell is sharp, but it promises flavor during the long months to come. On the hearth, a pot simmers with turnip greens and salsify, thickened with a handful of dried oats. It's not a grand meal, but it's comforting. Osric stirs it with the back of a spoon, letting the steam rise into the room. He doesn't say much, but the nod he gives when he tastes it says enough. These were the quiet evenings. No music, but the fire. No stories but the ones people remembered aloud. Like the tale of the lovage root that grew so large, they used it to plug a hole in the barn wall. Or the old man who claimed he could talk to mallow plants and that they warned him when storms were coming. Nonsense, maybe, but good nonsense. The kind that stays with you. Outside, the sky begins to darken, deep purples and soft reds folding into gray. A few lamps are lit across the village, cows low softly in the distance. Somewhere someone laughs. Somewhere else, someone sings under their breath while sweeping the stoop. Heloisa gathers her seed bundles, wrapping them carefully in cloth, then tucks them beneath her bed. She lies back and watches the ceiling beams above her, tracing the shapes of knots in the wood. She doesn't say it out loud, but she's proud of what she's grown, what she's learned. She closes her eyes and listens to the house breathe. And outside, the garden rests. The plants, the earth, the worms beneath, all slowing, not stopping, just resting, just enough to begin again. The sky is nearly black now. Only a few pale stars peek through the shifting clouds above the village, and even they seem sleepy. The wind has quieted. The last embers in the hearth give off a low orange glow, casting soft, flickering shadows across the walls of the cottage. Elswith adds one final log to the fire, not for heat really, but to keep the room breathing gently through the night. It's a comfort more than a need. The kind of gesture people make when they know how darkness settles. She moves slowly, with care. Her movements speak of years, not old age, but lived-in strength. In a small basket, on the table, sit a few items gathered late in the day, some fading chard, a knotted bit of wild carrot root, a few young fennel fronds, and a tiny clutch of wood sorrel, its heart-shaped leaves still damp with dew. These will go into tomorrow's broth, or perhaps a flatbread, with onions if the miller brings flour. Heloisa wraps herself in her blanket and turns toward the wall, her hand resting under her cheek, her other curled around a small linen pouch that smells faintly of thyme and lavender. She made it herself, stitched carefully, filled with dried leaves to calm the nerves and ease sleep. She made one for her brother, too, after he started waking with night terrors last winter. He won't admit it helps, but he hasn't cried out since. Even now in sleep, the plants keep working. And this is something understood deeply in this world. Food, healing, comfort. They weren't separate. They lived in the same roots, the same beds, the same patient tend. Take fennel, for instance. Eaten raw, it cleared the breath. Cooked, it flavored fish. The seeds were chewed after meals for digestion, and when bruised and steeped, they became a calming drink for colicky babies and weary women. Or wild thyme, used to clean wounds, yes, but also burned on coals to drive out bad air, or spirits, depending on who was talking. Was it science? No. But it worked well enough, and sometimes belief was part of the cure. Even the act of growing was a kind of quiet faith. You planted without guarantee. You waited with hope. You harvested with thanks. And so much of this passed from hand to hand, not as instructions, but as habits. You learned when to plant winter savory. Not because someone told you, but because you watched your mother press the seeds into the warm soil, whispering the date to herself, brow furrowed with thought. You knew calendula helped with skin, not because it was written anywhere, but because a neighbor once showed you the yellow salve she made for her child's rash, and you never forgot how it smelled like summer fields and beeswax. There's no parchment for that kind of knowledge. No ink, only memory. And sometimes, forgetting. Not everything survives. There were plants once used daily that no one remembers now. Alexander's, skirret, third bennet, sorrel root, once vital, now nearly gone from the tongue. Some replaced, some abandoned, some lost to the hush of time. But every now and then, someone digs one up, tastes a forgotten flavor, finds a recipe in an old margin, a note in the corner of a crumbling ledger. Good for stew, bitter, use only the small ones. That's how memory returns. Not all at once, but in bits, in garden corners and quiet cups of broth. Osric, now half asleep in the chair near the fire, turns his head just slightly. The room is quiet but full, not of noise but of presence. The presence of soil and steam and smoke of old things done well, of small things that mattered. You too may be drifting by now, letting your mind settle. Maybe the names of plants are starting to blur, soft sounds like mallow, sorrel, beetroot, skirret, each one carrying with it a feeling of warmth, of being looked after. And maybe that's what this really is, in the end, a long remembering of meals that started with dirt under the nails and ended with bowls held close to the chest, of hands that didn't need books, just time, of vegetables that no longer speak loudly, but still wait quietly in the margins, waiting for someone to plant them again. Night has fully arrived. Not just darkness, but depth. That thick, woolen sort of quiet that wraps itself around the village after the last fire crackles out. Even the wind has gone still, as if it's listening. Inside the cottage, the coals are glowing faintly in the hearth, giving off just enough warmth to keep the chill from creeping in through the stone. Everyone sleeps now, but not everything rests. Outside, beneath the moonlight, the garden seems almost alive in a different way. Leaves flutter faintly, not with breeze, but with breath. There's a hum to it, a kind of memory, as though the plants themselves remember the hands that touched them. This is the hour of old stories. Elswith, when she was a girl, would sit near the fire while her grandmother spoke of mandrake root, how it shrieked when pulled from the earth, how you had to harvest it with a dog on a string, or not at all. She never saw one. Few people did. But the story was enough to make her wary of any root that looked too human. Even simple vegetables carried their own legends. Parsnips, some believed, grew sweeter when planted with whispered blessings. Others said beetroot should never be harvested on a full moon, or it would rot before it reached the pot. Silly, perhaps, but when you live by the land, when so much is out of your control, a little story helps you feel connected. Even the superstitions were a kind of comfort. Wormwood, sharp and bitter, was once called the herb of forgetting. Sailors drank it before leaving home, so their dreams wouldn't be haunted by what they left behind. Healers would crush it into wine for those with grief too heavy to carry. Whether it worked didn't always matter. What mattered was the ritual, the act of preparing something with care, of saying, "I see your pain." Yarrow was stitched into soldiers' tunics for luck. Fennel tied above a door to ward off plague. Nettle, when placed beneath a pillow, was said to protect against theft, though only if plucked without speaking. And then there was Celandine, yellow and small, believed to be favored by swallows. Elswith was told that if you held its petals to your eyes, you'd see truth. She tried it once. All she saw was a sky too big for her to name. These were not the stories of nobles or kings. These were the whispers that passed between tired hands in kitchens, in fields, beside beds of the sick, or graves dug too early. Vegetables weren't just food. They were the messengers between people and the earth. They told you when to act, what to prepare for, and sometimes what to hope. Heloisa once heard a tale from the weaver's wife about a boy who ate nothing but wild cress for 3 weeks and began to speak in riddles. She didn't believe it, but for a while she avoided the cress near the fence, just in case. Even Osric, practical and quiet, has his beliefs. He always plants skirret under a waxing moon, always carries a dried mallow flower in his satchel when he travels to market. He says it's for aches, but he never uses it, just holds on to it, like a promise. These small traditions, these scraps of meaning wrapped around plants, were how people made sense of the world. The church had its books, the nobles had their banners, but the villagers had stories, passed down like seed, some real, some not, but all of them alive, in their way. Outside now, The night deepens even further. A thin mist settles across the fields, curling low over the garden beds. The plants drink it in, silently. The soil darkens with it. The smell of earth rises, deep, rooted. Inside, the only sound is the slow, steady breathing of people who have worked and eaten and cared and rested. The rhythm of a family, the rhythm of a season. And maybe, if you're lying still now, eyes closed, breath quiet, you can feel yourself close to them, not just watching their world, but moving through it, as if you too had a patch of earth and a bowl of broth and a handful of seeds in your pocket. As if you too knew the names of plants that most have forgotten. So let them stay with you tonight, not as trivia, not as novelty, but as something older, something shared. These vegetables were once the difference between hunger and hope, between illness and healing, between silence and story, and their roots still run deep. The village, still tucked under the quiet of night, rests without urgency. But just beyond its edge, where the wild begins to blend with what is tended, the world is still moving, quietly, gently, beneath the stars. In the morning, before the first cocks crow, and long before bread hits the coals, Elswith will rise to gather, not in the garden, but beyond it. Out along the edges, where things grow without permission. These places aren't fenced, or even named. They're simply known. The slope by the elder trees, the dip near the stream, the sunken field past the sheep pens, where the soil stays cool and the shade stretches long. That's where the wood sorrel grows best, low to the ground, with its soft green heart-shaped leaves that fold closed at night. It's sharp on the tongue, almost lemony, and when crushed between your fingers, it smells like the start of spring. Elswith only takes a little, a small bunch for flavor. Too much would steal the warmth from a meal. She tucks it into her basket, alongside a few fronds of wild fennel, its feathery leaves catching the light even in the early gloom. Fennel grows where it wants, often in dry places, the kind of herb that doesn't ask for comfort, just room. Its seeds are saved for winter, for bread, for remedies, whispered over steaming cups. Further along, down by the stream, grows water mint. The smell is unmistakable, cooling, clean. It spreads between the rocks like it knows it belongs. She pinches a few stems, careful not to slip on the moss-slick stones. These will be used in washing water, or perhaps as a tonic if someone wakes with heat in the chest. Elswith isn't the only one who gathers. Most families do, some more than others, some better than others. There's a boy in the village who once brought home a basket of foxglove. Thinking it was wild spinach, his mother fainted when she saw it. He's teased for it still, but gently. Everyone makes mistakes when they first start looking. Foraging was not a novelty then. It wasn't a weekend pastime or a romantic return to nature. It was a thread in the larger tapestry of survival, and not just about filling the pot. Gathering was also about watching, noticing the changes. What bloomed earlier than it should, what vanished after too much rain, which roots had gone bitter, which greens came back stronger than the year before. The plants spoke, if you knew how to listen. Ground ivy, creeping near the base of the old chapel wall, was once used to flavor ale, before hops, before recipes became rules. It gave the drink a sharp herbal edge, and some claimed it cured melancholy. Others just liked the taste. Self-heal, a tiny purple flower grows near the well. You might miss it, unless you're looking for it. The women in the village steep it into oil to rub on bruises. The name says it all. Whether it's true hardly matters. The act of believing in it does the first half of the work. Heloisa knows where the best plantain grows, the kind with broad leaves and thick veins. Not for dinner, but for wounds. She once pressed it into her brother's palm after he caught his hand on a splintered beam. It stopped the bleeding. He didn't thank her, exactly, but he stopped teasing her for a week. That was thanks enough. Out in the farthest field, behind the haystacks, is a little thicket where nettles grow in proud, painful clusters. No one touches them without gloves, but everyone uses them, boiled into broth, brewed into tea, even made into string if you've the patience. They sting, yes, but they give more than they take. Like many things in life, even thistles, those spiny, stubborn plants, have use. Young stems peeled and boiled become tender, the roots dried and powdered, bitter medicine, a reminder, even the sharpest things can hold value. And this is something deeply woven into the way medieval people saw the world. Nothing was truly useless. Everything had a role, even weeds, even bitter roots, even the things that grew uninvited. They filled the spaces between cultivated rows, between seasons, between harvests, and hunger. And the act of gathering was never just practical. It was a kind of presence. A woman kneeling at the edge of a field, her hands sifting through leaves. A child lifting a plant to the light, asking, "Is this one good?" A man bending to smell a sprig of mint in a place where mint shouldn't grow. These were small rituals of belonging. To know a place, you had to know what grew there. And to feed a family, you had to pay attention not just to what you planted, but to what arrived without asking. So tonight, as you listen, and your breath slows, and your body softens into stillness, maybe you feel some part of that settling over you. The idea that nourishment comes not only from what we grow with intention, but also from what we are willing to notice, to receive. Let that thought root itself gently in you, like chickweed between the stones. The cottage is silent now, save for the soft rhythm of breathing and the occasional creak of cooling wood. Outside, the mist hangs low, pressed gently over the fields like a woolen blanket laid out to dry. The garden is shrouded in a hush that feels ancient. Time doesn't pass here. It rests, but the stories don't sleep. They stir in the quiet, in the corners of the room, in the gaps between the ticking of the heart. Elswith once said, only once, and softly, that when her mother died, the first thing she did was tend to the sorrel. She weeded around it with trembling hands, her sleeves still damp with tears. It wasn't the kind of grief you could speak, but the motion of the task, the knowing what the plant needed, gave her something to hold on to. That's how it is sometimes. Vegetables, herbs, the earth beneath your nails, they don't offer answers, but they anchor you. And sometimes that's enough, especially in a time when loss was a constant guest. In this village, like so many others, gardens held the shadows of those who once tended them. A child now gone, whose favorite herb was fennel. A grandfather who taught his kin to split salsify roots down the middle to check for rot. A sister who sang while shelling broad beans into a wooden bowl, each one falling like a soft drumbeat into memory. These were not things written down, but they lingered. In the smell of boiled beetroot, in the feel of nettle leaves under gloved hands, in the way someone bent to tie back a climbing pea vine without knowing they were mirroring a gesture done decades earlier. There is a softness to this kind of legacy. You don't inherit it, you inhabit it. And Heloisa, just beginning to sense the weight of it, sometimes wonders how many of these plants remember. She walks the garden in the early hours, fingers brushing the tops of leaves, lips murmuring names she's only just learned. Not because anyone's watching, but because it feels respectful, like saying hello. She keeps a bit of woodruff under her pillow now. It smells sweet when dried, like hay and honey and the very edge of spring. It's said to bring calm dreams, And she's been dreaming more lately. Of her grandmother's hands, of gathering cow parsley in a woven basket, of voices she never met, calling out names of plants she's never seen. There's comfort in that, in knowing we're not the first to kneel in the dirt and ask, what is this good for? And not the last to taste something bitter and wonder, could this save us? Even Osric, steady and spare with his words, carries his own ghosts. There's a patch at the back of the house where wild celery grows tall and tangled. He never harvests it, just leaves it to thrive. It was his father's favorite. He says nothing about it, but tends it with a quiet hand, removing weeds, tying back stalks after storms, leaving an extra pinch of compost there each spring. It's a kind of conversation, because these plants, these old, mostly forgotten vegetables, they aren't just physical. They hold a space for memory, for meaning, for the invisible weight of things unsaid. When someone passes, their garden tells the story first. The soil goes untended. The weeds move in, but then, slowly, someone else steps in, begins again, pulls back the thistles, saves the seed. In that way, grief becomes a cycle, just like planting, not something you get over, but something you grow through. Even the seasons know this. Spring isn't a beginning, it's a return. The sorrel comes back, the mallow stretches up, the lovage peeks through, taller this year than the last, and the person who is gone is remembered in the scent of soup, in the motion of harvest, in the quiet moment of standing barefoot in the garden at dusk. So as you lie here now, eyes soft, breath slow, perhaps you can feel the weight of that story settling over you like evening fog. Not heavy, just present, like memory, like soil. Let it stay with you. The fire is down to the faintest glow now, just a whisper of heat beneath gray ash, but it's enough to keep the cold from creeping too deep into the stone floor, enough to soften the silence so it doesn't feel so wide. Elswith is still asleep, her face turned toward the wall, lips parted slightly, brow smoothed by rest. Beside her, Heloisa stirs faintly in her dreams, something she won't remember in the morning, though it will shape her mood all the same. Osric has risen again, early, as he often does. He moves like a man used to being the first awake. He doesn't light the lantern, doesn't strike the flint, just stands in the half-dark, sipping cold water from a clay cup and watching the sky shift shades behind the trees. There's peace in this part of the day, before the world makes any demands. And as he waits for the light, he thinks, not in words, but in pictures, sensations, of the garden, of roots pulled clean from the earth, of the ache in his hands after turning soil, of the smell of crushed fennel on the wind. This is when the memories come. He remembers the white beetroot his grandmother used to grow, not as sweet as the red, but creamier somehow. She'd stew it with vinegar and wild thyme. No one makes it that way anymore. Not even Elswith. He doesn't miss the taste, exactly, but he misses what it meant. A certain kind of evening, a certain kind of warmth. Some vegetables carry that, not flavor, but feel. Turnips meant hard times, but also reliability. You could boil them into anything, roast them with salt, mash them if your teeth were failing. Leeks reminded people of feast days in some regions, stewed down until soft, with barley and beer, served to a room full of relatives you hadn't seen since the last harvest. Pea shoots, young and green, carried hope. You planted them early and watched them climb, watched the tendrils twist around twine or old sticks. They were fragile, but they rose, always reaching a small lesson. And chervil, light, feathery, almost easily lost to breeze, was often the first green that let people know they'd survived winter, that the worst was behind. Its presence was subtle, but it meant everything. Even skirret, that pale, thread-like root, spoke of resilience. It grew slow and messy and often needed thinning, but once established, it came back again and again. It didn't demand much, just time, and in return, it gave sweetness, a soft, unexpected sweetness, like kindness from someone you hadn't expected it from. These plants weren't symbols because people wanted them to be. They became symbols because people needed them to be. In a life that was often short, often uncertain, they were reliable. They told you when the season turned. They told you when to sow, when to rest, when to save. They gave your hands something to do in the silence that followed. Loss or doubt or hunger. Heloisa, half asleep, curls deeper into her blanket. A faint smile tugs at the edge of her lips. She's dreaming of her garden again, though she doesn't know it yet. A row of pea shoots just sprouting. A patch of chervil in full bloom. Her hands in warm dirt, her face in the sun. Later, she'll wake and wonder why the morning feels so soft. And somewhere deep in the field, the plants grow on. No one watching, no one asking. But still, they grow. And maybe that's the lesson that carried people through the hardest years. That even in the most silent winters, the roots were doing their work. Quietly, without glory, without wit, just becoming. You too might be drifting now. Body heavier, mind quieter. That's good. Let this stillness take root. Let the names of these old foods stay with you, not just as facts, but as feelings. A little parsley, pressed into bread dough. A pinch of sorrel to cut the fat of broth. A few leaves of wood sorrel in the bottom of a wooden bowl. Not enough to fill you, but enough to remind you. The earth remembers, and now, so do you. Dawn is close now. There's a faint blue tint along the horizon, soft as milk and tea. The stars are fading, not all at once, but one by one, like candles being gently blown out in a great, far-off hall. Alzeric is outside again, crouched at the edge of the garden, pulling up weeds by hand. He doesn't need to. He could do it later, but this part of the morning is his alone. The work is slow, quiet, familiar. He works a bit of chickweed, loose from the soil, careful not to disturb the young beet greens growing beside it. Chickweed is edible, but he's pulled enough for now. He lays it in a little pile, to feed to the chickens later. Nothing goes to waste. Not here. Behind him, the house is still sleeping. Elswith might stir soon, her first steps always slow and deliberate, like she's stepping into the day one careful breath at a time. Heloisa, likely, will wake with the sun. She always has. The ground is still damp from the mist. It clings to the soles of his boots and darkens the cuffs of his trousers. There's a crispness in the air, a hint of the season turning again. Not quite yet, but soon. He checks the cabbages, thick-leaved and strong, their outer heads glistening with moisture. These are a staple, dependable. They'll be harvested in stages. The leaves pulled one at a time. The cores kept in root cellars packed in straw to last into winter. A well-tended cabbage could stretch far into the lean months. Beside them grow the field peas, winding around stakes, hammered into the dirt. These will dry in their pods for storing. Elswith soaks them overnight in water and simmers them into thick, satisfying stews. There's always one pot of peas on the hearth, as predictable as sunrise, as grounding. And at the far corner of the plot is the row of skirret, growing quietly beneath the surface. Osric won't harvest them for some time, but just knowing they're there brings him comfort, like savings tucked away. A small promise that not every day needs to be figured out in a rush. Back inside, the fire is being rebuilt. Heloisa kneels before the hearth, coaxing flame from last night's coals. She adds kindling, bits of dried fennel stalk, a bundle of broom straw. The fire takes with a soft crack, and the room begins to warm. She stirs a pot of barley porridge with chopped mallow and a spoon of last year's honey. It's not sweet, not really, but hearty, the kind of food that fills the belly and lets you work until dusk without complaint. And as the room slowly brightens, something else settles in, a sense of rhythm. This was the true gift of the medieval garden. Not just the food, but the repetition, the rituals, the predictability of planting, the welcome tedium of weeding, the satisfaction of harvest. There was comfort in it. Every spring brought nettles, sorrel, chervil. Every summer, fennel, beets, celery leaf. Every autumn, skirret, salsify, wild radish pods soaking in vinegar. Every season brought with it a story, a lesson, a quiet measure of who you were. You didn't have to ask what your life was about. It was there in the dirt, in the seeds saved, in the meals prepared for family, neighbors, widows down the road who'd lost the strength to tend their own beds. Heloisa adds a bit of ground ivy to the porridge now, just a pinch for the bitterness to keep it from going too soft on the tongue. Her mother showed her that. Her mother's mother showed her, and likely someone long before them did the same. No one owns these recipes. They live in the hands, in the bowls, in the gardens, passed down not with ceremony, but with repetition. And there's a beauty in that, not grand, but deep. Osric steps back inside, brushing the dirt from his hands. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. The fire is going. The meal is ready. The day has begun. They'll eat, then work, then eat again. And by nightfall, they'll return to the same stillness that greeted them this morning. And the vegetables, quiet as always, will still be growing. So let yourself rest here a little longer, in the soft light of this simple life. There's no rush. The garden moves at its own pace, and so can you. There's a certain quiet that only comes when everyone is doing exactly what they're meant to, not rushing, not stalling, just moving as the sun does, with steady purpose. The kind of quiet you can feel in your ribs. It's not the absence of noise, it's the presence of belonging. Osric finishes his meal with slow, grateful bites. He doesn't waste a crumb. The spoon is set carefully. The spoon is set carefully beside the bowl. He lets the warmth from the porridge linger in his chest before pulling on his boots. Elswith wipes the table with a damp cloth, the same way she has for decades. The wood is stained and uneven, but it holds their meals, their elbows, their laughter, and their silence. If you asked her what she owns that matters most, she might point to this table, or the soil. Because the truth is, their lives are written in dirt more than in ink. This garden, these vegetables, this way of life. It isn't just how they feed themselves, it's who they are. Osric is the man who grows the best skirret in the village. Everyone says so. Not because he boasts, but because his roots are always straight, always sweet. People bring their children to ask him how he does it. He never says much, just shrugs and says patience. But the truth is, it's more than that. It's years. It's knowing the way the soil smells when it's too dry. It's knowing not to water after the second frost. It's knowing how to rotate where the salsify goes so it doesn't grow tired. It's a kind of knowing that lives in the body. Elswith, too, is known for her way with nettles. Other women complain about the sting. She says they only sting when you're not paying attention. She gathers them barehanded in early spring, folds them gently into her basket like linens, and turns them into soups and teas that warm the belly and cool the fever. When someone in the village is ill, they knock at her door. And Heloisa is becoming her own kind of person, her identity still soft like a seedling, but she already knows which herbs grow under oak and which prefer the company of stone. She has an eye for it, a touch. It's not something you're taught, not entirely. Some of it grows in you, like the plants themselves. That's how these vegetables shaped people, not just by feeding them, but by naming them. The man who grew fat hen through drought, the woman who steeped woodruff for the dying, the child who first noticed the lovage was blooming early. It gave people a place, a reason to rise, a way to be remembered. You didn't need to own land. You just needed to know it, to walk it with care, to pay attention. You could be poor and still be the one people came to, for seeds, for roots, for advice on how to lift a heavy cabbage without breaking the stem. There was pride in that, quiet, honest pride. Because in a world full of uncertainty, plague, war, harsh winters, a well-tended row of turnips was a kind of resistance, a claim, a promise. We're still here, and we still remember how, and even now as you listen in the dark, perhaps miles and centuries away, that sense of connection is still alive. Maybe you've never held a skirret root, or smelled drying tansy, or run your fingers across a leaf of ground elder and known exactly how bitter it would taste. But your body understands the rhythm, the weight of a spoon in your hand, the warmth of soup in winter, the scent of herbs rising with steam. These aren't foreign things. They're older than memory. They live in you. You don't have to plant a medieval garden to be part of this story. Just remembering these names is a kind of growing. Just listening is a kind of tending. So let this linger with you tonight, that you belong to something, that there are roots beneath your sleep, that there is peace in knowing small things deeply. The sun has risen now. It's not yet high, just hovering low in the sky, casting a soft golden light across the thatch roofs and furrowed fields. The village glows in that early hush. Dew still clings to the leaves. A few wisps of smoke curl from chimney tops. No urgency yet, just beginning. Osric is already in the garden, of course. He's tying back the pea vines, careful not to snap the young tendrils that search for something to hold. His breath clouds slightly in the cool air, but his hands move without hesitation. He's done this more times than he could count, but it never stops mattering. Across the way, Elswith stands at the door, arms folded beneath her shawl, watching the garden with a look you only see in people who've given their life to something. Not loudly, not publicly, just entirely. Inside, Heloisa writes. It's not a letter, not a diary, just notes. She doesn't know what to call them. A scrap of cloth, a bit of charcoal, a careful drawing of a leaf she saw yesterday along the road. Long, thin, slightly curled. It might be wild parsnip, or something else entirely. She adds a question mark next to it, folds it gently, tucks it into a pouch with others like it. This too is part of the work. The day is stretching out ahead of them, the way it always does, filled with small tasks, small rituals. They'll gather the last of the mallow before it seeds. Osric will check the cabbage patch for rot. Elswith will boil a tonic for the neighbor's daughter who's been coughing in the night. Nothing dramatic, just life, rooted in repetition, in notice. And as the warmth rises and the fields begin to hum with quiet movement, it's worth pausing just for a moment to look back. We've walked together through old vegetables. Most have forgotten. We've touched skirret, fat hen, wild fennel, lovage, mallow, good King Henry. We've seen how they fed not just bodies, but lives, how they healed, flavored, connected, how they marked the seasons, how they gave meaning to days, how they whispered stories from hand to hand, from soil to seed, from silence to song. And what's perhaps most moving of all, none of these plants were rare. They were common, ordinary. They grew in corners and hedgerows in between more important things. They didn't demand attention, but they offered everything. And in doing so, They shaped the people who tended them. You might be lying still now, your eyes closed, your thoughts drifting not just through history, but through your own quiet memories. Maybe a kitchen, a garden, a hand stirring soup, a plant you once pulled from a crack in the pavement and didn't know the name of. That's the thread. That's the connection that time cannot break. And it's here, right now, not in the past, but in you, in your breath, in your stillness, in the way your heart slows when hearing these names, in the way your mind lingers on the shape of a cabbage leaf in the morning sun. This moment is a garden too. And here, halfway through our journey, you've already begun planting something of your own. Something rooted, something gentle, something enduring. By mid-morning, the village has fully woken. The air hums with soft movement. Doors opening, buckets being filled, low conversations drifting between yards. There's no hurry here, just a slow, steady unfolding of the day. The kind of pace where everything gets done, eventually, and no one forgets to look at the sky. In the garden, Heloisa is kneeling beside the beet patch, pulling back the leaves to check the roots beneath. They're coming along nicely, smooth, dense, firm to the touch. Not quite ready for harvest, but close. She presses a thumb gently into the soil beside one, nods to herself, and moves on. Elswith is behind the cottage, standing over a small wooden table, preparing a bundle. She's tying together sprigs of wormwood, yarrow, and a few flowering heads of tansy. Not for cooking, this is an old tradition, one she learned from her mother, and her mother before that. She calls it a house charm. It's meant to hang near the door, to keep illness and ill-tempered spirits away. Whether it works or not, well, who can say? But the herbs smell strong, clean, and there's something soothing about the act itself. The tying, the bundling, the hanging with a small loop of twine. In these times, medicine was not just in the body, it was in the gestures. A broth, left quietly on a neighbor's step. A handful of sweet Sicily, shared for a child's cough. A small clay pot of pickled purslane, offered with no need for repayment. People lived close to hardship, and because of that, they lived close to each other. Vegetables weren't always grown just for one's own table. Sometimes they were grown for giving. Osric remembers a year, long ago now, when the rains came late and stayed too long. Most gardens were drowned, but his plot somehow held. He had turnips enough to spare, not many, but enough. He didn't say anything about it, didn't call it charity. He just left bundles on doorsteps, tied with straw. No one mentioned it. But the next spring, someone slipped a pouch of fennel seed into his hand at market. Another offered him the strongest string beans she'd saved. It wasn't repayment, it was memory. This is how communities were stitched together, root by root, leaf by leaf. Even now, as Heloisa walks through the village paths, she sees the evidence. A patch of fat hen growing outside the cooper's yard, planted, not wild. He must have remembered her saying how much her mother liked it in soup. A bunch of wild garlic drying on a neighbor's windowsill, gifted, no doubt, from the boy whose sprained ankle Elswith had wrapped just last week. The land remembers what people do with it, and sometimes it gives back. Heloisa adds a few more notes to her cloth-bound bundle. Observations about how quickly the mallow flowered this year, how the wood sorrel curled earlier than usual in the heat. She's not sure why she's keeping track. Not yet. But she feels in her bones that one day it will matter. Maybe not to her, but to someone, because these vegetables aren't just vegetables. They're evidence that someone lived here, worked here, noticed things, grew what could be grown, even when the weather turned strange, or the roof leaked, or the aches in the joints came early and stayed late. They are the quiet records of life lived, carefully. And you, listening here, still and steady, are part of that care now. These stories, these names, these herbs, they've reached you, and that means they're not forgotten. Not really. Because every time we speak of them, remember them, imagine them in our hands, they grow again. The afternoon is beginning to stretch its limbs. There's a certain stillness in this part of the day. Not the sleepiness of evening, nor the rush of morning, but something softer, like the air itself is pausing, letting the light fall more gently, letting the dust hang longer before it settles. Elswith is sorting through a small wooden chest beneath the work table. Inside are cloth bundles of dried herbs, folded paper packets of seeds, bits of twine, a carved spoon worn thin from years of stirring. She's looking for angelica root, a remnant from the spring harvest, not for eating today, but for a tincture she's preparing. 1 part root, 1 part vinegar, left to steep by the fire. It's said to guard against cough and chill. But more than that, it smells of the first warm days, and she finds comfort in that. Across the yard, Osric is trimming back the broad beans. Their season is nearly done. The pods are thick and heavy, bending the stalks with their weight. He gathers them one by one, dropping them into a basket lined with wool. They'll be dried for winter use, stored in earthenware jars, sealed with wax and hope. This part of the year is full of transition, nothing dramatic, just the quiet giving way of one phase to the next. The lettuces are bolting, their leaves turning bitter. The sorrel has flowered. The chard stands tall but tired, and the peas, once bright and sweet, have begun to dry on the vine. This is not failure. This is what plants do, and people too. They grow, they peak, they fade, they seed, and then, when the time is right, they begin again. That's one of the oldest lessons of the garden. Nothing is wasted, not even time. The waiting matters as much as the harvest, the weeding as much as the reaping. The season when nothing sprouts, just as meaningful as the season when everything does. You learn that quickly when you live by the land. You learn to wait for the right kind of cold to sweeten the parsnips. You learn to watch the sky before planting turnips. You learn not to rush the spirit, no matter how eager your hunger feels. And over time, you realize you are not in control. Not really. You are in relationship with weather, with soil, with luck, with time. Heloisa is learning this now. She once tried to force a bed of wild carrot in early spring. Despite her mother's warning, the shoots came up quickly, all promise and energy, and then collapsed under the frost. She was angry at first, angry with the soil, the sky, even herself. But Elswith had just nodded and said, "Next time, wait." And so she did. This year she planted later. The greens are smaller, but they're still here. And now, as she runs her fingers through the soft fronds, she understands patience doesn't just mean delaying, it means trusting. Trusting that the soil knows its pace, that the season will come, that not everything worth having arrives on demand. The same can be said for so many things: healing, forgiveness, understanding, even sleep. You might feel that now, how the world has slowed inside you, how your breath has settled, how your thoughts have quieted. That too is part of the garden. Not everything happens above the ground. Sometimes, the most important things are the ones you can't see. The root systems, the soil mending itself, the seeds swelling, unseen, beneath the surface. And perhaps tonight, that's where you are too. In the unseen part, the part that doesn't need to perform or produce, just rest quietly in its own season. Let that be enough. The wind has picked up slightly. Not sharp, just present. It moves through the garden like a hand through hair, lifting the edges of leaves, stirring the drying herbs that hang from the rafters. It reminds the trees to sway. It cools the pots by the hearth. It makes you notice how still everything was just moments before. Elswith steps outside with a basket beneath her arm, not because she needs anything urgent, but because she knows better than to waste a breeze like this. A good wind helps dry herbs faster, carries away the damp that settles in during long still days. She's been drying calamint and ground ivy, laying them out flat on woven trays. She stops at the mallow patch, what's left of it, and plucks the last few flowers. They've started to curl inwards, petals thinning, stems softening at the base. A little late in the season, but usable still. Usable, that word shows up everywhere in this life. It's how people thought, how they moved, how they made decisions. Is it usable? Can it be stretched, boiled, soaked, saved, shared? That's what vegetables were, more than anything. Answers to limitation. Most years there wasn't abundance. There was enough. And sometimes, not even that. And so forgotten vegetables, the skirret, the oric, the chickweed, the Alexanders, they weren't quaint or curious or part of a trend. They were solutions to hunger, to boredom, to sameness, to the question, what can I still make from what's left? In years when grain was scarce, fat hen was ground into rough flour. When salt was low, people dried sorrel and used it to season broths. When people were too tired to chew meat, they cooked salsify down to mash. These plants didn't ask for praise. They just showed up, quietly, in corners. They filled the gaps. And when the weather failed, or the livestock fell ill, or trade slowed to a halt, these vegetables were what stood between a family and silence at the table. Heloisa knows some of these stories. Others she imagines, but all of them live in her bones now. She sees a bit of corn salad sprouting by the fence post, unplanned, uncultivated, and she doesn't pull it. She lets it grow, not because they need it today, but because they might tomorrow. She's learned something her grandmother used to say: the earth always has a second idea, meaning even when the first plan fails, there's something else beneath it, quietly growing, waiting to be seen. That's why the forgotten vegetables mattered. They were the second idea, the backup, the unexpected gift, the thing you almost missed, but didn't. And in this way, they taught people something more profound than cooking. They taught adaptation. They reminded people to pay attention to what was overlooked, to gather before they asked, to dig a little deeper, to stretch what was available, to trust the quiet parts of life. So much of the medieval day was built around making do: a cracked pot, a worn blade, a thinned stew. You didn't discard. You didn't complain. You got creative. And in that creativity, something almost like grace. Elswith returns inside now, a small bundle of herbs in hand, her face touched with the peace that comes from moving with the rhythm of the land. Heloisa places a few of the dried wild radish pods into a jar lined with waxed linen. She labels it not with a word, but with a small charcoal sketch, 2 looping leaves and a dot. Her own language. And Osric steps inside from the garden, brushes off his sleeves and sits at the table. No words, just a slow exhale, just the sound of belonging. And maybe you feel that now, a kind of gentleness, a quiet knowing that the simplest things are often the most lasting. That what nourishes us best isn't always what's prized, but what's present. So rest here, if you need to. Let your breath be enough. Let the silence grow full again. The day is warmer now. The light has settled into that easy glow, bright but not harsh. You can feel the weight of it on your shoulders, in your back. The kind of warmth that makes you slow your pace, loosen your grip, let things take the time they want to take. Osric is sharpening the edge of a hoe, not because it's dull yet, but because he believes in readiness. He likes tools to be ready before they're needed. It's a habit he picked up from his grandfather, who used to say, Blades should rest sharp, like a man after a good day's work. Elswith is kneeling near the patch of good King Henry, her fingers brushing the soil, checking for any early signs of yellowing in the leaves. It's holding up well this season. The greens are rich and full. She pinches a few tender ones to cook with later. Nothing more. The rest she leaves. This plant grows better when it's not picked too hard, too fast, like people. Heloisa is sitting on the edge of the stoop, barefoot, sorting through a small pile of seeds. Some are hers, some gifted, some traded. Each one carries more than food. It carries a story, a choice, a hope. She lays them out on cloth, skirret crowns, parsnip seed, the black pebble-like pods of Alexander's. She doesn't know yet when she'll plant each one. Some she might save for another year, some she may give away. She just wants to see them. To be reminded, because saving seeds is an act of quiet faith. You don't just save them for yourself. You save them for who comes next, for the seasons you haven't yet seen, for the failures you haven't yet faced. You hold them in your palm and say, without speaking, we're not done. And in the medieval world, where life was often short and uncertain, this mattered more than anyone ever said aloud. Seeds were wealth. Seeds were knowledge. Seeds were love in a linen pouch. People passed them down with careful instructions, or sometimes with nothing but a knowing glance. Plant this deep. Water it just after the moon turns. Don't forget, it doesn't like company. Give it space, or simply trust this one. It grows when nothing else does. Osric remembers how his mother once gave him a single seed, black and knotted, rough to the touch, and told him it would grow into the strongest parsnip he'd ever eat. He planted it beside the rain barrel, watched it every day. It sprouted, then died after 3 weeks. He was heartbroken. She said nothing, just handed him 2 more the next season. That was the lesson. Seeds don't promise success. They promise possibility, and that was always enough. Even now, in a world far removed from that one, the lesson holds. Maybe especially now. The patience to wait, the care to preserve, the willingness to try again. Heloisa folds her seed cloth carefully, tucking it into the small wooden box where she keeps her tools, her sketches, her best thoughts. She lights a small stick of dried wormwood and lets the smoke drift lazily out the window. Not for any spell or ritual, just because she likes the scent, bitter, herbal, honest. And outside, the garden continues as it always has. The roots deepen, the leaves stretch, the air shifts, and everything, quietly, moves forward. You're still here with it, still resting inside the story. No hurry, no need to arrive. Just be among the growing things. The garden is quiet again, not silent, never silent, but at ease. The wind has shifted, coming now from the east, bringing with it the faint scent of dry earth and old wood. The kind of wind that stirs the upper leaves and leaves the soil undisturbed. Osric stands near the bean rows, watching the clouds move slowly across the sky. He's done with most of the day's work. There's still more to do, of course, there always is, but for now he's content to pause. His hands rest on the top of the spade, earth still caked in the creases of his fingers. He lets the sun find his shoulders. Heloisa moves between the beds, brushing her fingers lightly over the young plants. She's checking for pests, but mostly she's just saying hello. That's what it feels like to her, like greeting. The beetroot are firm, the skirret sturdy. A few of the carrot tops are starting to twist, and she makes a mental note to pull them early before the flavor gets muddy. At the edge of the plot, a few weeds are pushing up between stones, and she leaves them. Not all weeds are enemies. Some are teachers. Some are medicine. Some are just part of the picture. Elswith is preparing broth inside the cottage. Simple, as always. A base of leek tops and dried nettles, softened in water, a bit of crushed barley stirred in, and a small handful of purslane. She picked earlier. There's no meat today, but there doesn't need to be. The flavor comes from time, from the layers of careful tending that went into every stem, every leaf. She adds a pinch of salt from the small jar she keeps hidden from view. Not because she's secretive, but because she knows how quickly it disappears if you're not careful. And through it all, the rhythm holds. The cycle, the subtle turning of season into season. Nothing in the garden hurries. Nothing demands. Everything knows when it is time. The chervil bolts before the barley is full. The sorrel rests when the heat rises. The salsify goes into hiding the moment the days grow long. People learn to listen, to move with these shifts. It's not always perfect. Sometimes the turnips rot in the ground. Sometimes the peas bloom too late. But still, they plant again. Still, they trust. Because in the end, this isn't just a garden. It's a life made visible. Each row a story. Each plant a memory. The earth is both canvas and record keeper. You can walk it and feel everything that's come before. The lean years, the lush ones, the hands that came before yours, the quiet triumphs of someone who made a meal from nothing but beet greens and patience. You feel it when you kneel to plant. You feel it when you gather in silence. And maybe now, as you rest, your body softening, your breathing slowing, you're beginning to feel it, that this isn't just about vegetables. Not really. It's about care, about the beauty in repetition, about giving time to something that won't thank you but will nourish you, about the kind of work that leaves no applause but feeds someone just the same. You don't have to be in a medieval field to understand this. You just have to be still long enough to listen to what's been growing all along. The hours pass gently now, not marked by clocks, but by light and warmth and the shift in air that says evening is coming. The garden doesn't rush, neither do they. Elswith stands at the basin, rinsing the last of the wild greens she pulled before the sun climbed too high. The water is cool, slightly murky, and filled with the scent of things freshly torn from soil, metallic, sharp, alive. She doesn't need to wash them this thoroughly, but she does it anyway. There's something reverent in it, like brushing dust from an old book. Osric is finishing the last of the repairs on the garden fence, tying twine where the old rope gave out, setting a flat stone under one of the leaning posts. He doesn't speak while he works. His hands do. Each knot, each placement is a sentence. This part of the fence matters. It's not just a boundary. It's an agreement with the land. You protect what you tend, not because it's yours, but because it's needed. Heloisa has taken to watching the light in the afternoon. She notes how it changes the way the leaves look, how some vegetables glow under it, especially the chard and the fennel. She doesn't say much about it, but she sketches quietly, trying to remember the way colors bend. She tucks a few beet leaves into a basket for pigment, murmuring the idea of ink. Not for a letter, just to try. Sometimes creativity is just another way to listen to what the land is offering. They'll eat soon. A simple meal. Warm barley with herbs. A few turnip greens fried in fat, and flatbread made with leftover wild flour and dried caraway seed. It's not grand, but it's deeply satisfying. It tastes of effort, of care, of seasons, of things that grew when they weren't expected to. They eat in silence, mostly. Not because there's nothing to say, but because they've already said it with their hands, their tending, their patience. Later, Osric will walk the garden one last time, before dark. It's a habit, not a task. He checks nothing in particular, touches the soil, pulls one weed he missed earlier. It's his way of saying goodnight, of thanking the ground, the same way Elswith smooths the linen over the cooling bread, or how Heloisa sets her drawings in a box lined with dried lavender and a feather she found by the stream. These things matter, not because they're noticed, but because they're repeated. And you, still resting with this story, are part of that rhythm now. You followed the leaves, the roots, the scent of broth, and the hush of early dawn. You felt the weight of routine that isn't heavy, but grounding. You've remembered things you didn't know you knew, and maybe, just maybe, you've realized this story is already yours. It's been growing there, somewhere in you, waiting quietly, like a seed in deep soil, just beginning to. The day begins to close its eyes. The sun has softened, its light leaning sideways across the fields, turning straw to gold and cabbage leaves to velvet. Long shadows stretch along the garden path. You can hear the last sounds of work, the closing of a shed door, the creak of a water bucket lifted, the hush that falls when no one needs to speak anymore. The world is winding down, not with a stop, but with a soft exhale. Elswith brings in the final bundle of herbs. Not much, just a bit of marjoram and wood betony, enough for the week. She hangs them near the hearth where the warmth will dry them gently. The scent fills the room slowly, clean and slightly bitter, like a story that's been told many times, but still carries truth. She kneels beside the fire, stirring the coals with a worn stick, not to cook, just to keep it breathing. There's peace in small rituals done for their own sake. Osric has finished his rounds, the fence is mended, the gate latched, the hens counted, and quiet. He wipes his hands on his tunic, eyes the sky. It'll be clear tonight. You can always tell by the way the air settles, how the birds sound different, like they know they've been heard. He doesn't say any of this out loud. He just looks, and that's enough. Heloisa sits on the ground, back against the wall of the cottage, her knees drawn up, a handful of fennel seeds in her palm. She lets them fall through her fingers slowly, like rain. She's thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe about how plants grow without asking. Maybe about how time passes the same way. Or maybe she's just letting her mind soften into stillness, the way a pond goes still when the wind decides to stop speaking. Inside, the cottage has gone dim. No need for candlelight yet. The last of the sun flickers through the shutters and pools on the floor. Elswith pours a little vinegar into a jar of wild garlic buds. She'll seal it tomorrow. For now, she lets the scent rise. It bites, sharp and clean, like memory, like something you forgot you loved until you smelled it again. And outside, in the garden, the vegetables rest. The skirret, the turnips, the herbs tied to rafters, the weeds left standing because they held their ground better than anything else. All of it exhaling, all of it easing into night. There's nothing more to do now. Just trust that what was planted will stay rooted, that what was gathered will hold, that what was tended today will feed someone tomorrow. And you, still here, are part of that promise. Maybe you're lying still, eyes closed, or sitting, watching nothing in particular. Let the rhythm carry you now. No thoughts to chase, no answers to find. Just this breath, just this moment, just this small, quiet harvest of peace. Night has taken its place now, gently and without protest. The sky above the village is deep and wide, peppered with stars like seeds scattered across dark soil. The garden is cloaked in shadow, but nothing feels lost. Everything rests in its rightful place. Roots deep, leaves folded, air cool and still. You can almost hear the quiet settling over the earth, like a soft wool blanket, tucking in each row, each corner, each sleeping stem. Inside, the fire has been lowered, just enough flame to keep the room from cooling too fast. Elswith finishes wiping down the table, running her cloth in slow, practiced circles. She doesn't rush. This moment is as much a part of the day as planting or harvesting, cleaning, folding, closing the space. It signals to the home that the day is done, that it can rest too. Osric sits with his back to the wall, legs stretched out, his head slightly tilted toward the ceiling. He's not asleep. Not quite. Just unwound. His breath is slow, even. His hands are still rough from the day's work, but resting now, open. There's no more to carry tonight. Eloisa has lit a small beeswax candle. The flame flickers gently as she flips through her folded sketches, crude drawings of herbs, leaves, seeds, a few notes scrawled beneath them. She doesn't read them, just touches them. The way one touches old fabric or smooth stones from a riverbed, there's a kind of prayer in it. A prayer that doesn't need words. Outside, the garden holds its own silence. The scent of soil is stronger now. Cooler, root heavy. You can almost feel it pressing upward from the ground, like a story being told beneath your feet. There's no light out there now, but moonlight, and yet everything seems visible. The beets still know their place. The fennel still sways ever so slightly in the breeze. The parsley, small and tucked into the corner bed, waits for morning as it always does. In these hours, memory becomes part of the garden too. You remember the way a certain leaf felt between your fingers, the warmth of bread flavored with lovage, the soft sting of nettles along your wrist. You remember someone's voice saying, "Not yet, wait another day." You remember the patience, the tending, the way even hardship had its rhythm. And maybe now, as you breathe a little slower, you begin to feel that rhythm inside you. Not as thought, not as language, just as presence. The deep, steady sense of having been part of something old and honest, something humble, something alive. So rest here. No need to reach for anything. The seeds are already planted. The work has already been done. Let the earth hold you, just like it holds everything else. The moon hangs high now, casting its cool light across the village rooftops and spilling silver into the paths between garden beds. It's quiet in a different way than the day. This is a sacred quiet, a hush not meant to be broken, the kind of stillness that asks you to listen, even if there's nothing left to hear. Out in the field, the wind moves softly through the tall stalks of drying beans. The leaves shiver in the moonlight, not from cold, but from knowing they've done their part. Elswith lies curled beneath a thick wool blanket, one hand resting on her chest, the other tucked beneath the edge of the pillow. Her face, worn by sun and years, is peaceful now. The lines around her mouth are softened, the lines between her brows smoothed by sleep. She's not dreaming anything she'll remember, just resting, deeply, fully. The kind of rest earned only through work that fed others. Osric has drifted off in his chair, his head leaning against the wooden wall, arms crossed loosely over his chest. The room is warm enough. The coals still glow faintly in the hearth. He breathes evenly, his body remembering how to surrender the day. Somewhere in that slow breath is every moment he spent planting, watching, carrying, repairing every turn of the soil. Every quiet triumph that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Eloisa lies awake a little longer, not restless, just thoughtful. Her eyes are fixed on the rafters, watching the moonlight catch the edges of their herb bundles hanging overhead. She counts them silently. Mallow, wormwood, sorrel, fennel, parsley root. She knows them by smell before sight. Each bundle a piece of someone else's wisdom, passed down in gestures and recipes, in touch and tone. She thinks about the future. Not in grand terms, but in seasons. She thinks about what she'll plant first next spring, whether the ground elder will come back thicker, whether she should try tansy in a new spot. She thinks about the drawings she hasn't finished, the way a leaf curls when it's ready to be picked, the soft resistance of skirret when pulled too early. She carries these thoughts like seeds, quiet but ready. And outside, the world continues to hold its breath. The garden doesn't sleep the way people do. Its rest is a readiness. Its silence a form of attention. The roots continue their work beneath the soil. The moisture gathers. The seeds left unharvested begin their slow swelling. What was today's meal is already becoming next year's hope. This is what vegetables meant to people back then. More than sustenance, more than survival. They were continuity. They were inheritance. They were love spoken in the language of soil. A father planting turnips so his children could eat in January. A mother saving the last good skirret root to dry for seed instead of stew. These were not small choices. They were acts of faith. And you, lying here now, still and breathing softly, are part of that same faith. Listening is a kind of planting too. Memory is a form of tending. And every time you carry a story like this with you, even silently, you become part of the old rhythm. Let it carry you now. Let your body feel the weight of nothing needing to be done. Let your breath be the only task left. The fire has gone quiet now. No more glow, only warmth held in stone and ash. The room is dark, but not unkind. A soft, enveloping dark, the sort that makes the edges of everything disappear so your thoughts can move more freely. You can still hear the wind through the trees, gentle and slow, like it's passing over something it remembers. The house creaks from time to time. Not from age, but from the settling of a place that knows it's done its job for the day. Elswith stirs slightly in her sleep, murmuring something too soft to understand, and then goes still again. A name, perhaps, or a recipe, or maybe nothing at all. The line between memory and dream is thin in these hours. Osric hasn't moved, but his breath is steady. The weight of rest has settled into his bones. And Heloisa is finally asleep too, curled beneath her blanket, with one hand tucked beneath her cheek and a dried fennel stalk still clutched lightly in the other. The moonlight moves across the floor in slow silver strides. It touches the edge of the table, the handle of the spade resting near the door, the rim of the wooden bowl that held supper hours ago. Nothing shines brightly. Everything glows just enough. Even the bundles of herbs above the hearth seem to bow slightly in the stillness, as if acknowledging the quiet that lives in this hour. Outside, the vegetables rest beneath layers of earth and dew. Some will not wake again until spring. Others will keep going, slowly, through the frost. They are not worried. They do not rush. Their work is long and quiet, invisible for months at a time. And yet, they keep the promise they were born with, to grow again and again when the time is right. And in this way, they are like stories. Some bloom in full light, shared over meals and songs. Others remain tucked deep in the soil of memory, waiting, not forgotten, just patient. The names may fade, but the feeling remains. Of hands in dirt, of steam rising from a bowl, of the trust placed in a seed. You've come far on this journey. 40 stories could never hold it all, but they don't need to. Just this one evening, this one voice, this one long moment of rest is enough to remember something old and rooted, something that lives not in the past, but in your breath, right now. So let it stay with you, the sorrel, the skirret, the wild fennel, the fat hen. Let them rest with you. Let them settle. Let your whole body feel what it is to be unhurried, to be tended, to be quietly, wholly enough. The garden is invisible now beneath the dark, but even unseen, it is still there, whole, quiet, waiting. The beds lie still beneath the thin silver of moonlight. The air has cooled, damp, heavy, not unpleasant, but hushed in a way that makes every sound feel further away. If you stood outside now, you wouldn't speak. You wouldn't need to. You'd just listen to the leaves brushing one another in their sleep, to the soft thud of an apple falling overripe from a forgotten branch, to the wind whispering its long route through tree and thatch and soil. Inside, everything is still. Elswith, Osric, Hilawissa, all asleep now, each with their own shape beneath wool and linen. The fire has faded entirely, just ash and faint warmth. The house holds its silence with grace, a kind of reverence. Even the tools resting by the door seem at peace. Spade, sickle, pruning hook, all used, all quiet, all waiting for tomorrow. The only movement is in the soft drift of dried herbs above the hearth, swaying ever so slightly with the change in air. They are a reminder that even in sleep, the world continues its gentle work. Oils still curing, roots still drying, memory still breathing through the rafters, because that's what this life was. Not grand gestures, not glory, but daily care, the kind you almost forget to notice until it's gone. And that's why these vegetables mattered so deeply. They weren't just nourishment, they were memory holders, patience trainers, symbols of continuity in a world that changed with each season, each illness, each frost. When someone walked the garden at night, just to check, just to be sure, they weren't just looking for pests or signs of rot. They were reminding themselves that the world was still growing, that life still whispered beneath the surface, that nothing was truly lost if it was remembered. And now, you've remembered Skirret, Sorrel, Alexander's, Mallow, Ground Elder, Fat Hen. You've walked the fields with them, sat by the hearth, listened to the wind move across old leaves. You've tended not only a garden, but a piece of yourself that still longs for simplicity, for purpose, for quiet connection to something living, steady, and real. So let the story rest now. Let the earth turn beneath you. Let the night hold you. Let everything be exactly as it is, unfinished, imperfect, beautiful in its stillness. The village sleeps, but the story doesn't end. It lingers, as old stories do, not with a closing, but with a soft continuation that settles somewhere inside the body. The kind of tale that asks nothing more of you than your presence, no response, no conclusion, just your quiet company as it unfolds in its own time. The garden, even in the dark, holds space for it. You could walk it now in silence and still feel where the beds begin, where the fence leans inward, where the scent of fennel once thickened the air. Elswith once said, on a rare evening, when the fire was high and the stew had come out better than expected, that vegetables don't just feed the body, they teach the soul how to stay, how to commit to something, how to return to it, how to live inside rhythm instead of against it. She'd smiled softly afterward, a little embarrassed by her own words, but no one questioned them. They were true in the way only lived things can be true. Heloisa, if she ever tells stories of her childhood, one day might not speak of anything grand. She might mention a day she spent peeling wild carrots, or how her mother showed her how to taste chervil and know if the plant had turned bitter, or how she sat in a field with a basket of weeds once, and realized halfway through that none of them were weeds at all. Because that's how knowing works. Slowly, quietly. Again, and again. You don't learn a garden in a season. You learn it by staying, watching, listening, failing, trying again, letting it speak before you do. And that too is what you've done here. You've listened to the soft lives of forgotten vegetables, to the way they shaped not just meals, but mornings, not just health, but home. You followed their names through silence and steam, through open fields and closed rooms, through soil and story. You've remembered things you were never told, and that kind of memory lives longer than anything written down. So let the stillness stay with you now. Let the mallow bloom quietly in your thoughts. Let the skirret stretch its thin roots through your chest. Let the sorrel's sharpness linger faintly on your tongue. And rest. Rest knowing that these plants and the people who grew them and the rhythm they followed are not gone. They are simply waiting. In the soil, in the stories, in you. The world is entirely still now. Not a single cart creaks in the lane. Not a hoof. Not a voice. Not a single door. Even the chickens have long since gone quiet, huddled in their corners, breathing slow beneath straw and feather. The village has become a memory of itself, softened by darkness, smoothed by time. Only the moon remains watchful, casting pale light onto stone and soil, silvering the leaves of cabbage and chard, brushing over the low rows of herbs like a blessing unasked for, but still received. Inside the cottage, the fire is gone. Not even embers remain. Just the scent of ash and old smoke, and the quiet weight of a hearth that held heat for those who needed it. The beds are quiet. No one stirs. Nothing is expected. All of the energy that filled the day has retreated into stillness, not lost, but stored. The way roots store sweetness in winter, the way seeds hold life without asking for attention. This is how these vegetables survive. Quietly, they do not need applause. They do not ask to be seen. They just wait for their time to return. That's why the forgotten ones matter. Not because they were exotic, not because they were rare, but because they were steadfast. Fat hen, ground elder, sorrel, skirret, Alexanders. They didn't grow because someone told them to. They grew because the land knew how. And people, in their best moments, learned how to listen. Heloisa will rise early in the morning. Before the mist lifts, she'll step outside barefoot, feel the cold stones under her feet, and smell the air to know if the weather's turning. She won't speak. She won't need to. Her hands will move from habit. She'll check the soil, glance at the sky, walk the garden without needing to measure or explain. And that, more than anything, is the inheritance. That no. Osric will wake when the light hits the wall just right, the way it has every spring since he was a boy. He'll stretch, groan, and walk straight to the door. He won't say it, but he'll be listening for bees. For the small hum that means the clover's ready. That sound will tell him more than any parchment ever could. And Elswith, before all of them, will have already prepared water for tea, laid out a cloth, and checked the shelf where she keeps the seeds. Not because she has to, but because some part of her believes it is a sacred thing, a way of saying thank you to the earth before asking anything from it again. And the vegetables, they will grow. They will stretch, unfurl, deepen, not for history, not for show, but because growing is what they are meant to do, just like us. The night has reached its quietest point, that moment where time seems to stop moving, where everything is held in stillness so complete it becomes a kind of music. The garden doesn't move, the air doesn't stir, and yet, beneath the soil, things continue. Roots stretch slowly, cells divide, moisture travels upward. Growth doesn't sleep, it only slows. Inside, the silence has taken on weight, a kind of fullness, as though all the work of the day has gathered here, wrapped itself around the walls and floor, and decided to rest alongside everyone else. Elsweyth's breathing is steady now. Osric's arms are folded loosely over his chest, the tension in his shoulders long gone. Heloisa turns just once beneath the blanket, and then is still again, lost in a dream shaped by herbs and wind and soft light. If someone were to walk past the cottage now, they might not see much. Just another home in a quiet village. But if they looked closer, if they stepped lightly, leaned in, listened, they might sense something more. The presence of care, of years spent learning the quiet language of plants, of mornings spent harvesting with cold fingers, of evenings spent rinsing greens in dim light, of choosing to grow things that others forgot, because they still held meaning. And that meaning didn't come from books or markets. It came from moments. The smell of chervil steeping beside a sick bed, the bite of sorrel in early spring, when your body craved something sharp and living, the quiet gratitude in someone's eyes when you handed them a bowl of stew flavored with last year's fennel. This is how memory lives, not always in names, but in gestures. And now, these gestures live in you. You've followed these stories through smoke and soil, through flavor and silence. You've walked the rows, touched the leaves, remembered the forgotten. And perhaps, without trying, you've brought something back with you. Not just the knowledge of old vegetables, but the feeling of tending, the rhythm of attention, the understanding that small, slow things still matter, that they always did. There's a stillness that only comes when something is truly complete, not rushed, not forced, just naturally come to its resting place. The fire has gone cold, the garden is cloaked in dew, and every living thing, both seen and unseen, has surrendered to the night. The last owl call has faded, the air no longer moves. The world feels like it is holding its breath, not in suspense, but in peace. Inside the cottage, not a single sound breaks the quiet. No shifting, no murmuring, just sleep. Deep, whole sleep. The kind you only reach when your work was honest and your day was real. The kind that doesn't need dreams to feel full. And you, still here, still listening, still resting inside this story, you are part of this stillness too. Because what you've been listening to hasn't only been history. It's been rhythm. It's been breath. It's been a way of living that gave time to things, a way that honored what grew slowly, what wasn't celebrated but mattered. The vegetables we've wandered through together, skirret, sorrel, chickweed, fennel, Alexanders, they didn't survive because they were powerful. They survived because someone kept caring, someone kept planting, someone kept tasting and trusting and watching and waiting. The people who tended them didn't write books. They didn't make headlines, but they remembered and they passed it on. Not always with words. Sometimes just with a handful of seeds in the corner of an apron, or a line spoken while stirring a pot, or a quiet correction when someone went to harvest too early. And so, in that spirit, you've become part of the passing on. You've sat by the fire. You've walked the garden path. You've listened long enough for the old names to feel familiar again. You've let your breath fall into step with theirs. And whether you ever plant skirret or sorrel or chickweed, you've still planted something. Something quiet, something gentle, something old. The night is deep now, and everything that needed to be said has already been spoken in soft gestures, in the slow boiling of broth, in the careful tying of herb bundles. No grand endings, no last words, just this quiet moment, suspended like a breath between the stars. The garden outside is invisible beneath the dark, but that doesn't mean it's gone. It's simply resting, like everything else. The turnips are nestled beneath soil. The fennel seeds wait for wind. The weeds, some useful, some not, lie still, untamed and alive. Elswith will rise soon. She always does, just before the light. There's something in her bones that knows when the night has given all it can. She'll pour warm water into her cracked clay cup, crush a pinch of dried mallow, and sit for a while without speaking. Osric will wake slowly, slower than he once did, but with the same quiet discipline. He'll tend to the gate, check the soil with the heel of his hand, and nod to no one in particular. And Heloisa, younger, not yet shaped entirely by routine, will still feel the weight of yesterday in her fingers as she steps barefoot into the garden. This cycle is not romantic. It's not dramatic. But it is sacred because it asks for attention. It asks for patience. It asks for the kind of presence that doesn't demand reward. These vegetables, forgotten by most, were the companions of people who understood how to live with the land instead of above it. They made no speeches. They simply planted, watered, watched. They didn't conquer time. They flowed with it. And now you've flowed with them. You've listened long enough to feel the weight of nettle leaves, the cool press of damp soil, the way broth smells when you stir in the last handful of chopped greens and step back just to let it bloom. You've given your time to this story, and that matters. Not because you needed the facts, but because somewhere in you the rhythm felt familiar. And maybe, without realizing it, you needed to be reminded that slow is not wasteful, that quiet is not empty, that old things, forgotten things, still hold life. There is peace in this, the kind that comes not from solving, but from staying. So stay with it a moment longer. Let it settle in your chest like warmth from a hearth long tended. Let it root itself somewhere beneath your thoughts. Let it be enough to simply know the names, to feel the garden resting, to feel your own breath finally match its pace. The cottage holds the night like a bowl holds water, quiet still, without spilling a drop. The walls, the rafters, the worn floorboards creak softly as they breathe in the dark. Everything inside is exactly where it should be. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole in its own way. And outside, beyond the shuttered windows, the garden waits without asking for attention. The skirt unseen beneath the earth thickens quietly. The chickweed spreads, unnoticed but steady. The wind carries the scent of thyme and old smoke, and somewhere a fox steps softly through the grass, as if it knows this place is not to be disturbed. There's something tender about the quiet here. It's not silence that presses in. It's silence that wraps around, like a hand on the back, like someone sitting beside you, saying nothing, but staying anyway. That's what this entire way of life was built on, staying through long winters, through bad seasons, through days when nothing grew and the pantry was nearly bare. People stayed, they made do, they adapted, and they passed that knowledge on, not with pride, but with purpose. Not everything survived, of course. Some plants disappeared completely. Some names were lost. Some methods fell out of use, swept away by faster ways, easier food, louder noise. But some things held. A few seeds passed hand to hand. A few stories whispered while hanging herbs to dry. A few memories tied with string and tucked into drawers, forgotten until someone like you stumbles across them and chooses to listen. That's what matters now. Not whether you plant sorrel or simmer parsnips, but whether you remember why it mattered, whether you understand what it meant to pull food from the ground with your own hands, to feed someone using nothing but a little broth and a little hope to choose. Even in hardship, to care, because care, in the end, is what this was all about. The care to notice, to wait, to trust, to offer what you had, even if it wasn't much. So maybe you'll carry that forward. Maybe you'll remember the names, or maybe just the feeling, the softness, the pace, the understanding that small things, especially small, quiet, living things, can outlast nearly anything if someone chooses to keep tending them. And maybe that someone, tonight, is you. The night is almost ready to turn. There's a softness to the dark now, a loosening, as if even the stars are beginning to exhale. The garden is still quiet, but it's no longer asleep. It's listening. The kind of listening that comes before waking. Roots hold firm. Leaves lie still, but there's a hum beneath it all, like a breath being drawn slowly before the first light spills across the fields. This is the hour when everything prepares, without rushing, when the world remembers how to begin again. Inside, the cottage holds its breath with the same quiet reverence. Elswith, Osric, and Heloisa remain wrapped in sleep. There is nothing to do yet. The tools rest, the herbs hang heavy with scent. The bowls are clean, the seeds remain untouched, tucked safely in linen and jars and corners where time has no urgency. And in that quiet, a truth lingers. Nothing meaningful was missed. Nothing was wasted. Every small act of care, every stir of the pot, every weed left standing, carried weight. You've come far on this journey, not in distance, but in depth. You've walked among the forgotten. You've bent low to smell what others pass by. You've stood in the soft soil of a world that didn't demand your attention, but welcomed it all the same. You've let your breathing slow. You've let your mind drift from noise to quiet. You've chosen to listen long enough for something old to bloom again. And in doing so, you've taken part in something older than history. You've moved not through information, but through presence, through rhythm, through breath. Like the people who once grew these vegetables, not because they were fashionable, but because they were needed, not for abundance, but for enough. Let that word stay with you now. Enough, not perfect, not ideal, just enough. The broth was enough, the seed was enough, the sleep, the stillness, the silence you've held, enough. You've tended something, even if only in your mind. You've remembered that time doesn't need to be filled to be valuable. That tending, real tending, requires nothing but attention and care. And that some things are still worth knowing, even if they don't speak loudly. The sky is beginning to pale, just barely, a quiet suggestion along the horizon. A softening of the black into something blue-gray and full of promise. The stars are dimming now, one by one, fading, not with fanfare, but with grace. The garden remains hushed, blanketed in dew, but it senses the change. The beet leaves tremble slightly. The tops of the wild fennel lean toward the east. The soil cool beneath the foot, but alive, always alive. Inside, the last breaths of night are being drawn. Elswith shifts beneath her blanket. Osric rubs one eye and rests again. Heloisa stirs but does not rise. There is no rush. The day will come when it's ready. And until then, there is still time for silence. Still time to hold the shape of everything that has come before. And for you too, the journey has neared its end. Not sharply, not suddenly, but gently, like a garden path that winds slowly back to the place you began, only now with something more carried in your hands. You've walked through days and seasons and stories. You've felt the weight of soil and the lightness of steam rising from a bowl. You've tasted forgotten leaves in your imagination and felt your breath find the rhythm of people who lived long before you, but not so differently. They didn't leave behind monuments. They left seeds. They didn't shout. They stayed. And through staying, through growing, through offering what little they had, They told stories that only quiet ears could hear. And tonight, those ears were yours. You've given your attention to the slow, to the rooted, to the overlooked and the ordinary. You've remembered that nourishment doesn't always look like indulgence. Sometimes it looks like chickweed or broth or a shared silence between two people, too tired to speak but full of love all the same. Let yourself carry that now, not as a lesson, not as history, but as something living, a rhythm, a pace, a way of noticing that you can return to any time you need it. Even when the noise rises again, even when the days speed up, you'll know this place still exists, and more importantly, you'll know how to find it. The first light of dawn is here now, not bright, not yet warm, but unmistakable. It spills gently across the tops of the hedgerows, brushes the thatch, glimmers faintly on the rim of the water barrel. Outside the door, the garden wakes without sound. No fanfare, just present. The dew clings to the leaves. The shadows stretch and fade. And beneath it all, the roots continue their quiet, ceaseless work, as they always have. Inside, the room begins to shift. The air takes on a new texture, the kind that signals a new beginning. Elswith sits up slowly, brushing her fingers through her hair. She says nothing, doesn't need to. She knows this light, this moment, this exact breath. It's the same each season. And still, it never loses its meaning. Osric stretches, Heloisa stirs, and the cottage, once wrapped in silence, now exhales with the world. This is where the story ends. Not because it's finished, but because it's been passed on. Like seeds tucked into a pocket, like dried herbs placed on a windowsill. You've walked the path. You've tasted the names. You've felt the weight of vegetables that most will never know again. But now you do, and because you do, they live. Not in museums or manuscripts, but in your thoughts, your rest, your rhythm. This story was never meant to dazzle. It was meant to stay, to settle into your bones, the way good broth settles into an empty belly. To remind you that not all nourishment comes with noise. Some of it arrives through repetition, through warmth, through a voice in the dark that simply sits beside you and says, you can let go now. You've made it through the night. And if you've rested, even a little, then the story has done what it came to do. And if something small feels different now, quieter, slower, gentler, then maybe something has grown in you too. So carry it with you and return when you like. The garden is always here, and it's waiting for you.